Hello and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB, coming at you with a complete crafting guide for the Brothers War, the new set launching next week on Tuesday, but doing an early access here tomorrow, probably at the time that you're watching this, if it comes out on Tuesday when I expect it to, which is kind of absurd. It sounds like I am going to need to record about 5 or 6 days worth of content in one day, so that's going to be very exciting. So make sure you check out Brothers War Early Access and then enjoy the gameplay footage for the time in between. And I believe in the time where it launches on Arena Tuesday, there is a pre-release the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe at your LGS. So get out there and experience the Brothers War. Today's video is brought to you by thecoolstuffinc.com Coverco Blue Dragon Rider playmat, token, and bundle. A really cool project that I'm excited to be a part of. You can check out that sweet art by Andrea Garcia. You can see the lightning. You can feel the fire. It's one of the cooler pieces of art I've ever had the pleasure to be a part of. It blows my mind, and I am so proud of it. I have shamelessly put it in some of the empty space here in the video above and over there, just to remind you guys that there's only 500 printed. We sold a ton in the first weekend, so by the time you watch this, I'm not sure how many are left, but go grab it while you can. You only have till November 21st. Go to coolstuffinc.com/CGB. Yeah, my own landing page on coolstuffinc.com. That's cool. Thank you guys for all the support. I really think you're going to like this product. Hopefully with some hustle arriving before Christmas. So the Brothers War, the crafting guide, the set review. We're going to go over all the cards I found notable, and there are so many notable cards in this set. And for rares and mythics, I'm going to tell you how many I recommend to craft. Not going to do that for uncommons and commons, because hopefully you have those wild cards around. If you don't, I understand, but I'm not sure exactly what to tell you to prioritize with such a tight budget if you're struggling with common and uncommon wild cards. So I'm just going to talk about the ones I find useful and where they might be useful, but I will provide crafting recommendations, how many I would craft on the rares and the mythics. This is exciting. There are a lot of good cards in the set. Many of them I've only read once, so some of this we might have to figure out as we go. It's going to be a long one, so without further ado, let's do it. Calamity's Wake is 1 and a white for an instant uncommon. Exile all graveyards. Players can't cast non-creature spells this turn. Exile Calamity's Wake. I love this. It is a great commander card. You know, Silence is a very popular commander card, but here this card is good in, you would say, mostly out of sideboards for best of 3 against counter matchups, but there's so much graveyard stuff going on that maybe it's playable as like a one of on its own in a deck. I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw that at some point. It's great for forcing through a combo if you have that. It's also a really cool response to a galvanic iteration. You can also, like, it's really good against mono blue. So if you hate mono blue, if you play this card and they can't counter it, don't counter it, and it is an instant, so you can time it very effectively. It also hits their whole graveyard, so their Haughty Djinn goes from power X to power 0. So Calamity's Wake, I think it's going to be a player, and I think I'll play it here and there occasionally in best of 1 even. In the Trenches, our first mythic of the review. By the way, also not going over every single card. I did vet it for what I thought would be at least close to playable, so I might miss one here and there, but I think I've got all the rares, all the mythics, and the interesting commons and uncommons. In the Trenches is 1 and a white for a mythic enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1, and for 5 and a white, exile target non-land permanent you don't control until In the Trenches leaves the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery and only once. I wonder, it depends on how many cheap good creatures are printed. I wonder how effective a Glorious Anthem type effect still is, something that for 3 mana gives all your creatures a bonus, where we have cards like Intrepid Adversary and Sigarda to do our buffing while also being awesome attackers themselves. This card would probably be unlikely to get played except for that next ability, which is sweet because you can play this on curve, buff your creatures and get attacking. But if you start to flood out, when you get to that late game, or you just set yourself up to that spot, you just turn that 6 sideways, you exile their key card, their blocker, and then you swing in and you win. I think that this will be a very playable card in white aggressive strategies. Thalia is another thing that makes you wonder if it will actually make the cut or how good it will turn out to be. The other big downside of the card is they see it coming 100%. When they know that you're gonna untap and possibly go to 6 mana, they might hold up some kind of interaction for in the trenches that just gets their creature back. Being able to kind of see that on the battlefield is good, but just because they can see something doesn't always mean they can stop it. How many of this would I craft? I could see this being a 4 of in a type of deck that doesn't want to run Thalia. And I also am not sure how good Thalia will be in the format going forward. There are still a lot of good sagas, but there's also a ton of good creatures coming. This one's a tough one. If you are an all-in mono white player who doesn't commit to Thalia or doesn't want to commit to Thalia, this is a 4 of. I think for the average player, I would craft 2 and see where it falls, but it seems like a very solid card, then I would love to try using it. The next card is Kayla's Command. 1 and a white for a sorcery, and it says choose 2. Create a 2/2 colorless construct artifact creature token. Put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. It gains double strike until end of turn. Search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and you gain 2 life and you scry 2. So a lot of interesting modes, all of them adding up to what would be probably an okay value creature. So like I could see a lot of times just using this to make a 2/2 and then search for a plains, but that's basically a borderland ranger in the color of white. I think that you need something really calling you to a specific mode to really want to play this card. Modal effects are great as long as you are pretty confident that some of the modes will always be good. And I'm not sure that the modes on this card will always be good. And I kind of surprised to say it, a card with this much versatility, but I'm actually going to give this a 0 and a don't craft because I can definitely see it playing out that this is a card that doesn't get played in any decks. If you really want to try it and play it, I would just craft 1 and see how it goes. It's never going to be a dead card, but it's also, it looks like it's going to be a very average rate card in a format full of very powerful on-curve threats, and I don't like that. Kayla's Reconstruction. Reading cards for the first time. I'm only going to mess up all of them. X white sorcery rare. Look at the top 7 of your library. Put up to X artifact and or creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Ugh. Looks like a really expensive attempt at a sorcery speed collective company Court of Calling thing. If it had Convoke, it would be a very interesting card. It does not have Convoke. You get to look at your top 7. If you play this for 5, you get to choose 2, but they have to be mana value 3 or less, which is a big knock because you have to have a ton of these cheaper creatures in your construction, and you don't really want to be playing something like this on turn 5 if you have a ton of cheap creatures and artifacts mostly. Will there be a deck or a build that actually hits exactly the boxes this wants, which is something that wants a bit of value or a reload in the late game but wants to play a ton of cheap artifacts and creatures? Maybe. Is totally possible, but in a typical mono white aggro deck, I don't see wanting to play this over a card that could just help you win the game a turn or 2 earlier. So for me, this Kayla's Reconstruction is a 0. Lay Down Arms. This is 1 white for a sorcery at uncommon. We exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. Sweet little Swords to Plowshares kind of throw back. I think that this card could definitely see play in a mono white deck, maybe like a 2 of in those types of spots. Hell, maybe it'll even be like a 4 of in an all plains mono white deck, because giving the opponent 3 life hurts as you're trying to close the game, but Exile target creature is really good. If you have 4 basic planes on the battlefield, blammo, you get to knock out Sheoldred. The card scales up to where you need it to be in the game as long as you are curving out. It also does not say basic planes, it just says planes. There is a world where you could play this with the cycling lands from Streets of New Capenna and have those land types in your mana base. I'm not sure how that will play out. That I have to test. I imagine if you're doing that, Leyline Binding is still better. But I think that this will see some play in mono white regardless. Lauren of the Third Path is 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary creature human artificer rare at vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. That right there is good. Like, we could stop there. The card is good enough. The next thing is tap you and target opponent each draw a card. That is definitely a sweet card in Commander. In Standard, you will use it when you have to. There are definitely spots where you getting a card is just what has to happen and your opponent can have one. I think that this is going to be a good mid-range card for a number of decks. I love that they have Vigilance on it. I feel like more creatures with tap ability should have Vigilance so that you can hit when you need to and attack when you need to, instead of taking that option completely off the table. And the artifact or enchantment, like kind of reclamation Sage vibe for this card in this format, I think will be critical. How many should you craft? Definitely craft 1. I think that everybody who plays white across, whether it's Esper, Naya, whatever, should craft 1. Should you craft 2? Maybe. I think that the card could at least be that prevalent. I would not craft more than 2 at this point, but yeah, 2 is the ceiling and 1 for sure. Lauren's Escape is a white for an instant. It says target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, scry 1. This is a cheap little common combat trick that will definitely fit into decks that don't run Slip out the back, because I still think Slip is a lot better and more versatile. But you might want maybe the next Slip out the back. Maybe you need 6 Slip out the back, so you run some Lauren's Escape, or maybe you're running like a white-green Boggles type deck, which has existed in the past, and you want to protect your creatures without playing blue. Lauren's Escape will do that job. I expected to see play in some types of Illuminator Virtuoso nonsense before the format is done. Meticulous Excavation, 1 white for an enchantment, uncommon, 2 and a white, return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. If it has Unearth, instead exile it, then return that card to its owner's hand. Activate only during your turn. In my opinion, I'm not going to worry too much about the Unearth clause. Yes, there's plenty of Unearth cards in this set, but that's not the thing that I'm mostly focused on. The activate only during your turn is a big downside. Committing a card is a big downside, but it's only 1 white mana. And when you think about getting into the later game and be able to pay 3 at any point to return your Spirited Companion and replay it to draw, return your Bankbuster and reload it with counters, return your Restoration of a Ganjo and play it again, your Saga, you know, that's done all of its work, you start thinking, okay, there's a ton of value there, and it's not a lot of commitment. It's only 1 white mana. Now, best of 1 is fast. There's a ton of tempo. It's like a real problem that it is a dangerous card to play in a fast format. That said, I could see a space for 1 of these. Like, this is a very niche card and it probably won't see play, but maybe there is a specific type of value deck like in white that doesn't have other ways to get a lot of card advantage that really wants it, and it could run 1 of these. It is an uncommon and it's going to be a fun card to play around with. Military Discipline is 1 white for a flash enchant creature. When this enters the battlefield, enchanted creature gets first strike until end of turn, and enchanted creature gets +1/+0. This is a common. Why am I highlighting this card? Because of that enchantment deck you all like so much. So if you picture the turn 1 Generous Visitor, turn 2 Kami of Transience, turn 3 you attack and you cast. Maybe you have 2 of these in your hand. Even 1 is really good, but if you just have 1, you play it, you get a +1/+1 counter from the Kami of Transience. You get a +1/+1 counter from your Generous Visitor. You get +1/+0. You get first strike. You get it all at instant speed. That's a lot of damage. So it's a really cool combat trick in the form of an enchantment aura, and there's already a popular enchantment deck in the format, and it's a common, so it's easy to craft. That's why I think this will see some play in the format. Hey cool kids, it's me, CGB, and I'm partnering with CoolStuffInc.com to bring you the Covert Go Blue Dragon Rider playmat. Each high-quality stitched edge playmat features the incredible art of Andrea Garcia and comes bundled with a matching premium foil dragon token with gold gilt edges. This playmat is too hot to handle, and you can pre-order it exclusively through CoolStuffInc.com today. Cool stuff in stock. Next up is Myrel, Shield of Argive? Myrel, Shield of Argive, 3 and a white for a legendary creature, human soldier, a 3/4 mythic. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Whenever Myrel, Shield of Argive attacks, create X/1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. So, makes a lot of little dorks depending how many dorks you have. I love the initial ability of locking out your opponent on your turn. This will be a very popular commander card for sure. How will it hold up in standard? I feel like the format has a lot of better 4-drops, but it's not necessarily about whether or not your 4-drops are better. It's having a lot of unique threats, and with all the legends basically being printed in this set, you really want your legends to be there in like 1s and 2s so that they're not overlapping each other too often and legend ruling each other, and just presenting the right kind of threat to the opponent. And I am not sure how this one will hold up. I think that it's very common at this stage in the format to, on turn 4, hold up mana. You're holding up Urtai, you're holding up Make Disappear and a Bankbuster activation, you're holding up Wandering Emperor. I run into this pretty commonly, pretty often, and if you play this on curve, the turn before your opponent has their 4 mana up, then on their turn, they are pretty much forced into doing something in that turn cycle, either dealing with Myrel or, you know, playing what they want to play on their turn at instant speed on your turn. Now that can be a fun tempo shift. I think in standard, it's a very niche card. It might be a sideboard card overall. In best of 1 standard, I could see it seeing play here and there. And the other X factor is the soldier deck. Soldiers, especially in blue-white, seem to be a pretty push tribe. It's actually going to be a very threatening group, so it's going to make the attack trigger from Myrel a lot better. So I would put this at, for most of us, for us playing a lot of Esper Legends and things like that, 1 or 2. I would lean towards 1 and be conservative because it's a mythic. For the Soldier Tribal gamers who can't wait to put Soldier Tribal to the Soldier Tribal test, this is probably a 3 minimum and 4 maximum card, as it's a major part of your offensive game plan and your ability to just put out one threat that can become many threats, which is normally something a tribal deck needs to be competitive. Our next card is a soldier, and it is a cheap creature, so it fits right in. The Recruitment Officer is 1 white for a 2/1 human soldier. Now, we've seen at times that's good enough. It was good enough for our little Fox Pilot friend in the last format, and this card will easily replace that. Or go alongside it if you want more 2/1s. It's 3 and a white to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of the library in a random order. So it has a late game kind of card advantage type effect. I like the idea of you play 3 creatures. If your opponent is behind but looks like they might be sandbagging or building up to a wrath, you activate this and you try to get some value off it, though for the most part you're probably attacking with the 2/1 a lot more than you're using the 3 and a white ability. Still, Recruitment Officer is probably one of the better 1 mana 2/1s in white for this particular format. I can't see it getting a lot better than that, and it's in relevant tribes with human and soldier. That's very good. So I expect this to be a 4-of player in a number of different decks. Siege Veteran. Siege Veteran is 2 and white for a human soldier rare, 2/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. I feel like I've seen this before. Whenever another non-token soldier you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So we get a little Luminar Cast Pirate, we get a little bit of Soldier Tribal payoff that keeps the board flooded. How did you not like this card? The biggest problem with the card, of course, is that it is 3 mana for a 2/2. So 3 mana in mono white is usually a critical point, a point where Anointed Peacekeeper can hit the battlefield, a point where Brutal Cathar can hit the battlefield, Adeline hit the battlefield. Is there like room for this card in the 3 spot? It gets so crowded so quickly. I think that the power of the card that we already understand, both the ability to kind of insulate yourself from a board wipe and put counters on things, I think it's a very good card. You do have to lean into the soldier synergy a bit, but not infinitely. And we might also see this in, you know, non-mono white. It's only 1 white pip, so it can go in a lot of green white decks and other various style of decks that want to use that ability, places where +1/+1 counters can really benefit it. So I think that this will see play in a number of spots, even at the 3 mana slot. Am I going to say craft 4 right away? If you are a soldier gamer, craft 4 right away. It's a tribal payoff. Of course, that makes sense. For the rest of us, I wouldn't be surprised if crafting like 2 is a pretty good option. I like having the threat of it in your deck. I don't know that you need 4 of it for it to be effective, but I think that I'll be crafting 4 for sure to try out the soldier deck, because I need to know how good that is, and I think soldier tribal is going to be a thing. So watch for that and get your siege veterans while you can. Next card is Soul Partition. This is 1 and a white for an instant at rare. Exile target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may play it. A spell cast by an opponent this way costs 2 more to cast. So, sort of a way to elite spellbinder your opponent from their battlefield. And it's non-land permanent, so it hits such a wide variety of things. It solves all kinds of problems. It doesn't cost you life like Infernal Grasp does. And yes, it only removes the card temporarily, but in the tempo based meta that we have, where true control isn't very common and all in aggro and tempo decks are mostly what we see, this card seems very, very good. And I'm not sure exactly how many you want to run, because on one hand you could run a bunch of these if you plan to always just close, and maybe it is just a removal spell. If the opponent misses a land drop, this is like a 2 mana exile target thing removal spell, and that's awesome. However, in a long game, especially if you're like a control mage, or if the game grows late, they get those cards back, and that's a big deal. I think this is better than Fateful Absence, though. I think that card had a little buzz early for tempo decks, but eventually ended up being too you know, it's just too punishing when the opponent gets to draw more cards, as cards are so powerful nowadays and you get value from so many things. I think Soul Partition is better than that, and I think that you're going to see this played a lot. I'm going to start out by crafting 2. I would not be stunned if this were a 4 of, but when it comes to removal spells like this, especially rare removal spells, there are so many conditional removal spells with different kinds of drawbacks that you kind of want to layer them. Like, you want 1 Infernal Grasp, you want 1 Destroy Evil, you want 2 Soul Partitions, etc., so that sometimes you kill the thing forever and sometimes you stall it. So I'm going to craft 2 Soul Partitions. Don't be surprised if I build decks with 4. I'll punch the mic again, yeah, just to emphasize it. No, I won't. Just kidding. Sorry about that. But yeah, 2 Soul Partitions sounds good. Our next card is, oh gosh, what is this? Takajia's Welcome? Takajia's Welcome? I'm going with Takajia's Welcome. 2 and a white for a rare enchantment. Whenever 1 or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. I can't get too excited about this. Welcoming Vampire is a very good card, and a creature version of this that can attack and block. I think that what makes this card interesting is you don't have to run a lot of creatures that are vulnerable to removal. If you have this and an enchantment that, say, creates a 1/1 every turn or something, then that alone will draw you an extra card every turn, and you're creating battlefield presence. But I don't think this card, I think in old formats, like long ago, before Eldraine, this card would be good. I think the way that cards are designed today, this card is mediocre. You might see it in the enchantment deck as like a 1 or 2 of, but I wouldn't play it there when you have Rite of Harmony. I am going to say craft 0, because I don't think that this effect is necessary in a lot of the decks today, and we have better versions of it that we can play in those decks. Union of the Third Path is 2 and a white for a common instant that says draw a card, then you gain life equal to the number of cards in your hand. What? I bet nobody expected me to put this card on my video, but here's the thing. Going way back to my early days of blue-white control mageness, when I was just a wee CGB, I played with a card called Gerard's Verdict. I think that was the name of it. Nope, that's not it. It's not even that. It's Gerard's Wisdom. Gerard's Wisdom, I believe. It's 4 mana, gain 2 life for each card in your hand. I basically would use Gaia's Blessing to shuffle it back into my deck over and over, and I would gain billions of life, and my opponents would scoop from frustration. And I see Union of the Third Path, and with draw a card attached to it, I don't know that this card is bad, because one thing that is very threatening to control decks in this meta is that your life total is constantly going down, and when you tap out to sweep the board, the opponent untaps and they cast like Invoke Despair, it finishes the job, or they bring out their Tenacious Underdog and they're still getting in damage and drawing cards, and like your life total just continuously goes down until it's 0, and there isn't much life gain that can really stabilize you. You're counting on like 2 life from your Wandering Emperor. That's tough. But with Union of the Third Path and maybe effects like Devious Cover Up or Witness the Future, you enter a world where they can't get your life total to 0 and they can't get their library to 0. So do you need a win con? Not really. So I'm interested in trying out some absolutely toxic, nasty control builds with Union of the Third Path as an accessory to a win con. It doesn't actually win the game, but it makes it so you can't lose the game, and I'm always happy to look for cards like that. Autonomous Assembler is 5 colorless for a 4/5 vigilant. Nobody, whatever, you can play it for 5 mana and it's a little better. This is how Prototype works. The Prototype version is usually an over clunky limited staple that you would never play in Standard in your life, but then on the Prototype side, maybe it's a playable card. So the Prototype of this is 1 and a white for a 2/2, and you get the Vigilance. You still get the abilities, so you get Vigilance and you get 1 and a tap to put a +1/+1 counter on target assembly worker you control. This itself is an assembly worker. So how good is a 2 mana 2/2 Vigilance for 1 and a tap, put a counter on it? It attacks as like threatening to be a 3/3 the next turn, because of Vigilance you can attack with it, and then if you want to, you can then put a mana into it and put the counter, so you attack with a 3/3. That's pretty good. There's a little bit of Luminarch Aspirate there. It's not a free counter, which is a big difference, but as far as a 2-drop, it's not bad. And it is an artifact creature. That could be a thing. There is definitely a lot of artifact synergy in the set. I expect this to see play somewhere, but I'm having a horrible time figuring out how to rate it, because I don't know if it's good enough for straight up mono white aggro. It's close, but I don't know if it is. And then I'm sure that the types are going to be more relevant in an artifact type tribal deck that will definitely exist because of this set, but I don't know if that set's going to play white or if it's going to care for this kind of effect. So this is a big unknown for me, so I'm going to give it a 0, but not because I think it's bad. I want you to hold off, and for those of you who like trying things early, craft 2 and try it in all your white decks and see if it's as good as we might hope it could be. Platoon Dispenser is 5 colorless for a 4/6 mythic artifact creature construct. What does it look like? Some kind of a dinosaur thing I've seen before? I don't know. It's pretty cute. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more other creatures, draw a card. It is 3 and a white to create a 1/1 soldier artifact creature token, and it has Unearth, which means you can cast it from your graveyard for 2 and a white, but then it dies at the end of turn. It as a mythic, I think this is a limited mega bomb in Standard. I don't know where you would play this. The idea of getting to your end step, having 2 or more creatures and drawing a card from it sounds good, and I could see how it could take over a long game when unchecked, but there are so many better options in the 5 spot. You're never going to run this over probably any of the dragons that you could run in this spot with sweet death abilities, as Exile is still not super popular in the format. Maybe that will change. So I see this as a craft 0. It's a sweet mythic, and it's got to be a mythic, I think, because of limited. It's so powerful there, but I think for Standard it's a 0. Steel Seraph is 6 mana for an artifact creature angel rare flying. At the beginning of your combat, Target creature you control gains your choice of flying, vigilance, or lifelink until end of turn, and it's a 5/4, and that would be trash. But there's prototype. You can get this for 1 and a white, and it enters as a 3/3. So how does it feel to have a 1 white 3/3 artifact angel? For one thing, Angel Tribal is struggling for numbers and they want more friends. This is very good there, so Giada is happy to see this card. The other point is that it works on the turn it enters. So the turn it enters, it can hand out that flying to push damage through on your opponent, or lifelink to shift the race in your favor. Now, it's in that nasty 3-mana spot, right? So do you play this over all the other good white 3-drops, even the ones that aren't in this format? Or if you stretched into multiple colors, like you could have Rafine in that spot, you could have Fable and Wedding announcement in that spot. It's like so tough to break into. So I don't see it unless you're specifically playing Angel Tribal for Angel Tribal's sake. There might be a decent Angel Tribal deck. I'm going to say don't craft this, but if you're an Angel Tribal player who wants to try it, please do. It's not a bad card, it just has too much good competition. The next card we have here is Urza's Silex. We've seen Karn Silex. What's Urza's do? 3 colorless for a mythic legendary artifact, 2 white, exile Urza Silex. Each player chooses 6 lands they control. Destroy all other permanents. Only as a sorcery. When the Silex is put into exile from the battlefield, so when you activate it, you may pay 2. Okay, so we have 6 mana at that point. If you do, search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it and put it into your hand and shuffle. Oh baby, you're telling me, much like Karn Silex, I was having a great time slamming Karn Silex on turn 3, then untapping, blowing up all my opponent's stuff with it, and moving on with life. You're telling me if I have 6 mana, I can go fetch a Teferi? I can go fetch a Wandering Emperor? That seems nice, and we'll see if this card really holds up. It does enter the battlefield untapped. That is sweet. If you have 7 mana, you can blow it up that turn, unlike Karn Silex. That is nice. So yeah, I'm into this card. I will probably find a place to play it, much like I did with Karn Silex. Will it be a format staple? I think that is very unlikely. The format is too tempo-based, and this card can be answered if it has to sit on the battlefield. And if it doesn't sit on the battlefield, it's very expensive. If this card is popular, people will find a way to beat it. And they might just beat it incidentally if there's too much artifact hate in the format. So for me, for CGB, I'm going to craft at least 3, probably 4, and play with it. If you really love like weird control brews like that, I think you should craft this card. Everybody else, I would say 0 probably. If you craft 1, it'll be great for Historic Brawl. I think it'd be a very fun card there, and I could see it being a 1-of in a number of decks that kind of run a Farewell in that spot. This one is like Farewell, but it offers you value too. Yeah, I would craft 1. I don't see how you could not craft 1. Very cool card. Curate is 1 in a blue instant reprint common, surveil 2 and draw a card. I put this on the list mainly because I'm wondering if it will replace Impulse in the mono blue decks. The reason it might is surveil puts those cards in the graveyard. So if you picture yourself surveilling and putting like say a land and an instant in the graveyard and then drawing a card, then you put 2 instants in your graveyard, which makes your Haughty Djinn and your Tolarian Terror a little better. There's also definitely a world where on turn 1 you cast Consider, you put a spell in the graveyard, turn 2 you cast Curate, you put 2 spells in the graveyard, and the Curate turn 3 you can play Tolarian Terror. Roar. So this card may replace Impulse in those decks. I love Impulse. It'll be hard for me to cut it, but we might see that. Next up is Defabricate, and those who pay attention to the channel know that this was my preview card. For 1 in a blue instant, choose 1, counter target artifact or enchantment spell. If a spell was countered, exile it instead of putting it in the graveyard, and counter target activated or triggered ability. A lot of people got on the thread in the video about this and said it was a sideboard card at best, and I don't agree. I have trouble picturing decks where this card does nothing, matchups where it does nothing. My biggest concern would be mono white, but there are several cards in mono white that this card could also deal with and play into. Countering an activated or triggered ability, I mean, that hits just about any type of thing and takes a lot of the sting out of a lot of these cards, since enter the battlefield or attack triggers are a big part of what they do. So I think that this card, as long as artifacts or enchantments are super popular for most decks, will be a playable Magic card in main decks in best of 1. That said, I probably wouldn't play more than 2 at any given point and would probably just play 1. But as long as Fable the Mirror Breaker and Wedding Announcement are some of the most popular cards in the format, this seems like a really good card to run a 1 of. So, Defabricate, I'm going to stand by it. Drafna, founder of Latinam, is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 legendary creature human artificer advisor. Nice code. I want that code. Rare. 1 and a blue, return target artifact you control to owner's hand, and 3 and a tap, copy target artifact spell you control. The copy becomes a token. 2/1 body for 2, not particularly great or as impactful as we're looking for these days. Legendary, useful type, human, useful type as well. Not sure what I'm doing with the return and artifact ability, and I haven't seen anything that screams out to me as you need to do this with that ability. And the 3 and a tap is very expensive and probably not going to happen very often. I think people will have fun with this for commander or building niche decks, but for competitive best of 1, I am going to give it a craft 0. Hercule Master Wizard is 1 and a blue for a 2/4 legendary creature human wizard advisor. Rare. Again, love the outfit. At the beginning of your end step, if you've cast a non-creature spell this turn, reveal the top 5 cards of your library for each card type among non-creature spells you've cast this turn. You may put a card of that card type from the among revealed cards into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Why is that so hard to read? I feel like I just got to work out on a Peloton or something. Anyway, I think that where this card wants to shine is an artifact creature type deck, especially if we also have artifact lands, which I didn't see any in the format, but maybe I'll see them before the end of the set review. But yeah, hitting multiple card types, like being able to play something like an enchantment creature, but probably more likely an artifact creature and hit multiple cards off it, sounds pretty cool. It still seems too slow to me. The 4 toughness is important. If it had 3 toughness, I would call it unplayable. At 4 toughness, if there's a good deck full of artifact creatures and like it's all coming together anyway into something you want to play, and Hercule fits in as a 1 or a 2 of, that's where I would play Hercule. 1 or a 2 of in a deck that where it would already be an absurd amount of value. Since I'm not sure that deck exists, my recommendation is to craft 0. Also, why does it look like there are multiple hands? I get it, this is probably a sleeve. I keep thinking this is a fist and this is the hand, and you have 2 hands growing out of 1 sleeve, and I can't get it out of my head, and it's weird, so I'm just running away. How about Hercule's Final Meditation? 4 blue instant rare. As long as it's not your turn, the spell costs 3 more to cast. I thought it would be 3 less. Holy crap, 10 mana. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. End the turn. Oh, that's why. Well, for one thing, Commander, Cyclonic Rift is already more than enough in Commander, and people hate it. The other thing is the end the turn part. If you do that on the opponent's turn, that's devastating. Man, why is it still an instant then? Oh, I guess just to offer the option. This card is way too expensive in my opinion for anything to do with Standard, and I'm going to give it a 0 based on cost. Now, if the format slows down significantly, if everything is mid-range, and if counter spells for really big blue instants don't really exist, then this card could see play, like a River's Rebuke used to in Teamer Energy Mirrors. So I wouldn't be surprised if this sees play at some point, but it doesn't seem like the right card for best of 1. It's more of like a best of 3 sideboard card for a specific matchup where the board gets mega clogged. 1 with the Multiverse is 6 blue for a mythic enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. Better be good. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. Cool. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. You get a little taste of Omniscience, and you get a lot of Future Sight. Not a standard card unless there is printed some way to cheap this in for like 4 mana or less. And definitely probably even then not a best of 1 card, but another fun commander card, and maybe some kind of a combo for cheating it out in historic. Another card that if you hit it off Emergent Ultimatum is absolutely terrifying for formats like that. Skystrike Officer is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 flying human soldier, rare. Whenever it attacks, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. Nice, but it's not tapped and attacking like Squee, so it's a little worse than Squee, but it flies, so it's less likely to die, so that's good. You tap 3 untapped soldiers you control and draw a card. Ooh, I like drawing cards. We'll have to see how this lines up in Soldier Tribal. My gut says that most of this card is 3 mana 2/3 flyer with no ability the turn that you play it. Of course, if you're curved out with soldiers, turn 1 soldier, turn 2 soldier, turn 3 this, you can draw a card that turn if you're not attacking, unless your stuff has vigilance. Things have to line up just right for this to be a great card. I think that this is a very medium card, and I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't see play, even in the soldier deck. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a 0, but keep your eye on it. If things line up just right, this card could be, it's a good card in the right circumstance with the right kind of soldier curve in the format, and also with a lack of other very awesome 3-drops. So yeah, at some point, I think the most you would play of it though is like 2, but we'll see about that. I'm going to craft 0 for now and wait. Splitting the Power Stone, 2 and a blue sorcery, uncommon. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact, create 2 tapped Power Stone creature tokens. If the sacrificed artifact was legendary, draw a card. I really want to know what legendary artifact I'm sacrificing that I can play on turn 1 or 2. I haven't done the whole search for it. If there are a few decent ones, especially if they like draw a card when they enter the battlefield, like some would call them eggs. Old Magic Boomers would call them eggs. If there were legendary eggs somewhere, this card is sweet. There's a lot of output here, like a lot of output, especially if that artifact is legendary. So keep an eye on this for the duration of Standard. This is a card that may not get played right away, but then the right card is printed and it becomes a playa. Oh, baby. Yes! Teferi Temporal Pilgrim is 3 blue mythic, 4 loyalty. It's a Teferi, of course. Whenever you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. Yeah! 0, draw a card, basically a +1 because of the static ability. -2, create a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. -12, target opponent chooses a permanent they control and return it to its owner's hand. Then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library. Boom. I don't think the -12 is going to happen a lot, but maybe there's some combination with Silver Scrutiny or Raffine. Oh god, this card with Raffine. That can make this thing ultimate very quickly, but for the most part, the -12 seems out of range. I think that the part of this card that needs and should never be underestimated is that the -2 is really good. The 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, it keeps getting +1/+1 counters even if they kill Teferi. No matter what happens, if you draw a card, you draw a card each turn. This little critter is going to keep growing. And again, this with Raffine really stands out as like, oh god. And when you look at the Raffine deck, you want a really good 2-drop, like a Denic, and then the next turn you want Raffine, and then the next turn you want Sheoldred. Like, that's a lot for the opponent to deal with already, and they have to, or they're just going to die to that curve. But then you throw a Teferi on there, like say they like prioritize and kill your Sheoldred, which is going to be game over if it stays around anyway. We've proven that. And then you drop this and they have to answer this as well. How does the opponent recover from these things? On top of that, we have a Planeswalker that gets card advantage but can also end games. So I play this in my control decks, my Devious Cover-Up style piles. They no longer need Devious Cover-Up. We have a win con. I can play my Teferi Temporal Pilgrim and my Wandering Emperors as win cons in my blue-white control piles, and I will probably feel very good about it. We don't need to go full toxicity 0 win con control. We have awesome cards that can do the job. So 4, not close. I think this card is sweet. One of the better I mean, all the Teferis have been good, but I think for standard, this is going to be significantly better than Master of Time. And it's hard to compare it to Hero of Dominaria because it has a very different way of closing games, one that could be very powerful if it's in aggro decks that Teferi Hero of Dominaria didn't fit into very well. And it's hard to compare it to the Time Raveler because, well, that's just a very different and unique card that fit in a lot of different decks. But stop comparing it to other Teferis. On its own, it's competing to be the best Planeswalker in Standard, I think, and it's going to be awesome. Next up, we're going to do Arcane Proxy. This is a 7 colorless mana for an artifact creature wizard at Mythic. It's a 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Arcane Proxy's power from your graveyard. Copy that card. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. An important line of text I hear. And then the prototype is 1 blue for a 2/1. So you can have an artifact creature wizard for 3 as a 2/1 that casts a spell from your graveyard for free the turn that you play it. That's pretty good value. Wizards continues to try to make something like this good. We've seen, I believe, Storm Chaser Mage was a recent attempt with its kicker ability, but Arcane Proxy has a lot of interesting stuff going for it. A lot of these prototype cards are expensive artifacts. There might be ways to take care of that in various ways. A card of certain mana value in the graveyard, or a creature of certain mana value in the graveyard, for example. But the prototype is it's very serviceable. If you play a consider or a card draw effect or a removal spell on turn 2, and then you prototype to make another on turn 3, that's good card value. You don't even have to do it necessarily on turn 3. This is a card that you can definitely wait for the right moment to get that card effect from your graveyard. One of my concerns is that it does require the graveyard. There's plenty of graveyard hate around, as you know, and smart players might just graveyard trespasser that instant or sorcery before you get to do your Arcane Proxy. I don't know exactly where this card fits, and that's a problem for it. I would definitely try it in control decks and mid-range decks, but since it doesn't just lock right in as a definite thing that I want to do all of the time, my take on the card is to wait to craft it, or if you're going to craft it, if you really want to play it, to craft 1. And there might also be like a prototype tribal synergy deck where you would craft a bunch, but I would just craft 1. And if you're skeptical, if you're cynical at all, just craft 0, because I'm not sure exactly where this card fits. Surge Engine. This is 2 colorless for an artifact creature construct Mythic Defender 3/2. For a blue, it loses Defender and it can't be blocked. For 2 in a blue, it becomes a blue and has base power and toughness. How many times am I going to have to say blue on this card? It becomes blue and has base power and toughness 5/4. You can only activate it if it doesn't have Defender. Okay, so you have to make it lose Defender first, and then you can level it up to a 5/4 for... Okay. I think I get it. 4 blue, draw 3 cards. Activate if it's blue and only once. What? So... Oh, it's not till end of turn. It loses these abilities permanently. So for 2 mana, you get a 3/2, and then the next turn you put a blue into it, and now it's a 3/2 unblockable. And it's no longer a defender unless it gets blinked or bounced or something. Awesome. And then you put the mana into it. So it's like an evolved sleeper leveling up these abilities. I wonder how good this is. It doesn't seem like if you just play it as 2 mana 3/2 defender, if your opponent's being aggressive and you just trade it, that's great. If the opponent uses a cut down on it, that's a lot less great, and they keep attacking you with a card that would have otherwise been dead if you had just played some kind of draw or removal spell. But it is a threat, and it does close. Like, if they let it get all the way to the 6 mana point and you get that draw 3, you're gonna feel really good. Not everybody loves a draw 3. And it is a mythic. I think what I don't like about it the most is it's not good with Rafine, so it doesn't fit that deck. So I'm not sure what the right deck is, but if there's an artifact creature deck that has a tendency to make a lot of mana, go long, and needs mana sinks, this can also all be done at instant speed. So maybe you play this on 2, hold up counter magic, and threaten to level this up if they don't do anything relevant. That feels good. I'm going to try it a lot. I'm going to recommend you save your mythic. This card could be a lot better than I even thought it was once I figured out that it wasn't until end of turn. And I won't be surprised if this sees some play. But as a mythic, me trying to evaluate it, I can still see a lot of flaws with the card. I'm going to tell you, don't craft. The Temporal Anchor, 3 blue, blue, blue legendary artifact rare. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 2. Whenever you choose to put one or more cards on the bottom of your library while scrying, exile that many cards from the bottom of your library. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. Okay, so we're scrying. We're putting them on the bottom. Then we exile them, and then we may play them. I think that the reason it's a scry and kind of interesting in this way is because of counter spells. You don't want to scry your counter spells to the bottom. You need to draw them into your hand because you can only play the cards exiled during your turn. So you want to send everything that isn't a counter spell to the bottom as long as your Temporal Anchor is hanging around. Yeah, that makes sense. It's still too expensive for standard. It looks like a really fun card, though, if we can cheat that artifact into play. It looks like a really fun card in Commander or other formats where it's easy to cheat artifacts into play. I think it's way too slow for standard. Teresian Mindbreaker, 7 for a 6/4. I bet this has some kind of a cheated into play ability. Whenever this artifact creature Juggernaut rare attacks, defending player mills half their library. Nice. It has Unearth. There it is. You can cast it from your graveyard, and it has haste. And then, you know, at the end of the turn, you exile it, right? Okay. Do we... Gosh. So you discard this, or you mill it yourself, and then you can mill half their library on turn 4. You still need a way to finish the job. Milling half of someone's library doesn't win you the game. Milling all of it does. So this seems like kind of a meme card, and I'm going to say not in standard unless they reprint, what is it? Bruvik is a 3-mana commander that says whenever you mill cards, you mill double that many cards. That would be a 3/4 combo for the win. And that is available, guys, in Historic Brawl. It's available in Historic. It's available in Commander. If they reprint that to standard, this card becomes good. But for now, for standard, craft 0. Ashnod, Flesh Mechanist. 1 black for a 1/1 legendary creature. Human Artificer rare, Death Touch. Whenever this attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, create a tapped Power Stone token. And for 5, exile a creature card from your graveyard to make a tapped 3/3 colorless zombie artifact creature token. The Death Touchness is nice. It's a good thing it has that. Otherwise, I'd say it just hits the battlefield and does very little too often. We need creatures to sacrifice. There are curves, I'm sure, for like red-black type decks. I know that there was a creature that when it dies, it makes a Power Stone, so you can make 2 Power Stones, and then you're really up and running. And maybe there's an Anvil. There's like an Anvil deck that runs this and a lot of creatures that you want to sacrifice. But it seems really narrow to me. It seems like the kind of card that looks cool, but the fact that you have to attack to get the ability, right, makes it kind of unlikely that you'll get there, or that by the time you are attacking it's relevant. And also attacking to get the ability means you can't stay back and hold back their giant monster with your Death Touch, and that's bad. So I am going to give this a craft 0, but I'm interested to try this in an Anvil deck. And if you're an Anvil brewer who likes trying new cards in your Anvil list, you should craft a few of these and see if it works. I have a bad feeling though that this strikes me as the kind of card that gets cut from the Anvil list before it's finished. So craft 0. Corrupt. Yes, Corrupt. This is an uncommon sorcery. It deals damage to any target equal to the number of swamps you control. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Bringing it up because once upon a time this was the win con in your Cabal Coffers mono black deck. And if you're old enough to remember, if you're old enough to have played that at Friday Night Magic, it's probably time to schedule a colonoscopy with your doctor. I got that meme off Twitter. I think Channel Fireball distributed it first. Anyway, Corrupt. Boom. Shakalaka. This card is a sweet one. And I don't think Mono Black needs this card. I think a lot of people are looking at this like, oh God, Invoke Despair into this, so much direct damage. And I agree. I don't think Mono Black as it exists needs to run Corrupt, although it may run 1, you know, something like that. I want to build a different kind of mono black deck, like a pure control deck that just wins with Sheldred and Corrupt. And then everything else is control element, control behavior, instead of this tenacious underdog graveyard trespasser, evolve sleeper nonsense, these weak little creatures. Okay, they're really good. There's a reason that mono black is popular and that it runs that way. Those cards are very good. But I want to do something different with it. I want to be corrupting my way to victory. So I'm going to try that at some point, and I'm happy that this card is a reprint. Diabolic Intent. Speaking of reprints, 1 in a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. It's rare. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand and shuffle. I mean, all kinds of decks might want some of that. Any card you want. It's a Diabolic Tutor if you're willing to sacrifice your early board presence. If Shambling Ghast were still in this format, or something like it gets reprinted to this format, that and this card would be nuts. It's kind of Deadly Dispute-ish all over again. In the format as we have it now, what I most want to sacrifice to this, another card that I might slot into Anvil. Like, what do you want most? You want to sacrifice your little dork and go get another anvil. The games where you have multiple anvils going, you are very hard to beat. So I love that idea for this card. A lot of decks are producing little creatures to sacrifice, but the snowballing nature of boards means you don't usually want to lose the creature that's on the board. You usually want to continue to push forward. So I don't think Diabolic Intent is going to be as amazing as it reads, but I think there will be some decks that will want this. And those players who are willing to throw away their early creature for any card in their deck, I think you want 2. I don't see any world where you want 4, or you're going to be blessed by the shuffler with those hands where you have 3 of this and no creature. You know it. You already know it's going to happen. So I would craft 2 Diabolic Intents if this is your jam. Disfigure is 1 in a black, -2/2 until end of turn at instant speed. It's a common. Why am I highlighting Disfigure? Isn't there already something like it? I think that rotated out. Lash of something from Strixhaven. So isn't Cut Down just better? Cut Down is great. I think that there may be a world where the indestructible cards, especially Guardian of New Benalia, the enlisting one, are very, very good. And Cut Down doesn't solve that problem. Disfigure does. So I think there's a world where Disfigure is either the sideboard or a couple of main deck that you're looking for, if that particular style, if that particular card, especially Guardian of New Benalia or things like it, become too popular. Dreams of Steel and Oil. Ugh. I've been having dreams about steel and oil lately. Weird. Wonder what that means. 1 in a black for an uncommon sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose an artifact or creature from it. And then you choose an artifact or creature from their graveyard. You exile the chosen cards. So at first you're like, yep, that's Divest. And Divest is probably fine in this format. There's enough bank busters and creatures going around. The only thing it doesn't hit that's super relevant are sagas. And the sagas are very good. So that is a major downside. But I could see this card seeing play. Then you add to it the idea of hitting the underdog out of the graveyard, or as I highlighted when I talked about Cemetery Protector or Cemetery Prowler, I think it was, any creature in this meta, the way that the meta is now, that you exile out of their graveyard is potentially like gaining a life and dealing 1 damage to them if they have Graveyard Trespasser somewhere in their deck. If they have a Graveyard Trespasser in their deck, at some point they were going to eat that creature. It gets even worse if it's Corpse Appraiser. Like Corpse Appraiser, they get to dig 3 cards deep and keep filling their graveyard and get a card of their choice. So exiling their stuff is super relevant. Be careful about doing it too much. If you're the one playing the Corpse Appraiser or you're the one playing the Trespasser, you may not want to exile those things. So also choose is not optional, but it doesn't stop the card from resolving, I believe, because of where the period is. But you do have to choose something when it does resolve, as I understand it. So certain decks, yes. Many decks, no. Just be careful with Dreams of Steel and Oil. Who knows what it could mean? Fateful Handoff is 3 in a black for a sorcery. At rare, draw cards equal to the mana value of target artifact or creature you control. An opponent gains control of that permanent. What? Why would I? Okay, some people are looking at this and they're going to pair it with a Demonic Pact in Historic or something like that. This card sounds like trash to me. The only way I would want to do this is like if they have like you each control a legendary creature and you hand them the legendary so they don't actually get it. It legend rules. I still hate this. Yeah, you still lose the card. No. I hate this. Somebody will somehow tell me how this can work, but I'm still gonna say no. Craft 0. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor is 1 and a black mythic 3/3 Phyrexian legendary Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. Worded that way because of Commander. For 4-player games, your fellow table mates can also draw cards. 4 black, discard X cards, exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Booyah! So we can cast some stuff from our opponent's deck for free. It's a really expensive ability, and it's hard to have a lot of cards in your hand when you reach 7, but that sounds like a really sweet mana sink when you can do it. That sounds like a fun way to spin the wheel. This strikes me as a very good commander card, but a decent and very decent card for standard. And I'm not sure exactly what decks it fits in, if it fits into a Rafine type style or mono black, but the fact that you can play this and then attack with your underdog, and if they take it, you get to draw a card, and if they block it, well, you just blitz it the next turn. Like, that's very threatening. And of course, if you curve out, you know, creature, and you're on the play, like, I don't think they're going to be able to block all of your creatures, so you're probably going to draw cards after or get a good trade. So yeah, Gix Yawgmoth Praetor looks like a very good card in specific spots. I'm going to be curious what decks it fits into. Because the 3 spot is crowded, and because there's so many good options, and because this is legendary, I'm going to say craft 2, but I am and for those of you cynical, just craft 1. It's a legendary, of course. You can play it in Historic Brawl as a 1-of, but I think 2 is going to be a good number in some standard deck at some point before the format is done. There's a lot of great options there. There is a world where this doesn't get played, but what world would you want to live in? That world? That 7-mana ability is so sweet. So yeah, I'm going to at least try 2. Gix's Command is 3 and a black rare sorcery. Choose 2. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 creature. It gains lifelink. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less. Return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, and each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. This card for 5 mana can be a lot of value. You can get 2 creatures into your hand and make the opponent sacrifice something awesome. That's basically a 3-for-1. The destroy each creature with power 2 or less could hit multiple things, so it's got a little board wipe to it. The card does concern me. It's really hard to picture in the 5 spot. You can run this, or you can run Invoke Despair. You can run Cruelty of Gix. You can run Junji. Like, those are all cards I've considered running in my black decks in the 5 spot without even talking about other colors. All of them strike me as more reliable than Gix's Command, but I think this is better than the last command that we saw, and I think it could be a 1-of, but I'm not sure. I'll probably try some kind of command control at some point, but not being an instant really hurts this card, like a lot in my opinion. So my recommendation is to craft 0. The next card is Gixian Puppeteer, 3 and a black, rare 4/3 Phyrexian Warlock. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Cool. When Gixian Puppeteer dies, return another creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Also cool. Good amount of value and fun stuff that can be done. Another card that goes good with Rafine. But is it as good as Sheldred? No, of course it's not. So I don't know where or how you're going to fit this into decks when you have options like Wandering Emperor and Sheldred. And I know Wandering Emperor is white, but just in black, of course you want to play Sheldred. You might want to play 4 Sheldreds and a way to reanimate a Sheldred before you would play your Gixian Puppeteer. So I struggle to see where this deck is going to fit in. At first you look at it and you're like, it's sweet with Rafine or some other way that draws extra cards like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but I guess not, because the saga would go off before this entered the battlefield. Yeah, overall, I think that this is a fine rare that is going to be outclassed by the other options at its mana cost. Go for the Throat. 1 in a black, instant uncommon, destroy target non-artifact creature. Does Sheldred suck now? We no longer have to pay 2 life for our Infernal Grasp to go 2 mana instant speed kill it. I think the format needed this. It was harder than expected to kill a 5 toughness creature. However, it's still in black, which continues to press people to play more black, which I don't know, but this card will definitely slot into those decks. There isn't a ton of reason to not run a Go for the Throat or 2 alongside your Infernal Grasp, so you're not paying life as often, but sometimes you need to kill an artifact creature. So I don't think Infernal Grasp is completely dead. I just think you're going to see way more Go for the Throats than Infernal Grasps unless an artifact deck conquers this format. The way that Power Word Kill became unplayable because there were a dragon deck was the popular control deck in the format. So for me, Go for the Throat is definitely going to get played. I would play it a lot early. It may have to phase out late when people find the artifact deck, but it might take a while for that to happen. So you probably want to craft these and get them in there for most of your Infernal Grasps, probably all but one from day one. Gruesome Realization is 1 and a black for an uncommon sorcery. Choose 1. You draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life, or creatures your opponents control get -1/-1. I love the modal nature of this card. It used to be that they'd print a card like Read the Bones or something like that, but then when you play that card and you're getting beat down, the card is basically dead and kills you, and now you can't play it. And that's what we discovered in Best of 1 Magic. Everybody thought Notion Rain would be an amazing card when Arena came out, but it was Arena and Mono Red was good, and we all discovered we just can't play those cards. When you look at Gruesome Realization, you have a realization that maybe you can play this card, because if your opponent is rushing you down with everything they have, you know, multiple 2/1s on the battlefield forever, or a Thalia, like being able to cast that mode and kill 1 or 2 creatures instead of drawing those cards is a big deal. I would have, if it was -2/-2, or even -0/-2, this card would be amazing. Like absolutely amazing, and I would play it for sure. As it is, there have to be a lot of 1 toughness cards in the format, or the format has to be slow enough that casting it to draw 2 is always good. That pair of things, like that's 2 different ways the card could be good. That tells me it might see some play here and there. Hostile Negotiations, cool art. Looks like something out of the Warhammer 40k decks. 3 and a black for a rare instant with a lot of text. Here we go. Exile the top 3 cards of your library in a face down pile, then exile the top 3 cards of your library in another face down pile. Look at the cards in each pile, then turn a pile of your choice face up. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. You lose 3 life. Instant speed, 4 mana, draw 3. But there's this interesting cat and mouse conundrum game where you're going to show a pile to your opponent and you're going to make them guess whether the first pile or the second pile is better. You are not choosing what's in the piles. That is chosen at random from the shuffler. You are exiling 3 cards, and then, let's see, let me make sure I'm reading this right. Look at, then exile the top 3 face down. Okay, so yeah, there's no say in this. One is face up, one is face down. You get to look at both, but your opponent, oh, you turn a oh, okay, face down, face up. I'm fine, guys, don't worry, this is fine. We've got this. We exile both piles face down. We do not choose what's in each pile. It's just top 3 and top 3, but they're both face down. We choose which pile to turn face up, and then our opponent chooses which pile goes in our hand. So you want to show them a pile where it's like, could be worse, but they don't know for sure what they're picking. So a little bit of mind games, the negotiations part of this card. Losing 3 life sucks. There's a lot of points in the meta where we just can't afford to do that. A lot of best of 1 metas where that is terrible, and definitely not a card I think we run 4 of because of that clause. However, 4 mana to draw 3 at instant speed is not something you see too often anymore. How much better is this card than Memory Deluge? Not a lot. Smart opponents are going to probably find a way to make sure the pile you get isn't meaningfully better than the other. It's not drawing cards, so it does work against Sheldred. It's one of the better ways to get deep into your answer and trying to find an answer to Sheldred. Of course, the problem with that is if the opponent sees that you have a removal spell in one or don't have a removal spell in one, they'll make sure you get that pile. The more I think about the card, the more I think there need to be and are better solutions, better cards that you would want to run in the format. It's a weird card. It's a lot of text. It's kind of confusing. And it's possible I'm not completely comprehending its gameplay because it's weird. I'm going to say don't craft it. And if you do craft it, I would start with 1 because you don't want to pay that 3 life multiple times, right? You really don't. And I'm not sure it's going to do everything you need it to do. Maybe 1 in like a hardcore Esper controller Grixis controls type deck is okay, but I would recommend craft 0 because it's a lot. It's just a lot to take in, and I'm not sure I've taken it in correctly. Misery's Shadow, 1 in a black for a 2/2 creature shade rare. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. We love that clause on things. Dothy Voidwalker has that, and it's awesome. Misery's Shadow gets +1/+1 till end of turn for just a little pump. A little Nantuko Shade callback. I love it. Yeah. Let's see. If there's a lot of death triggers in this format, this card is absolutely sweet and very playable. And I've definitely found that the Kumano Faces Kakazan backside actually comes up a lot. There's plenty of Disturb stuff. Think of like Denick that you want exiled, Underdog that you want exiled. How many of this can you afford to run? There's already pretty good 2-drops in the format. I would not craft more than 2. And I think crafting 1 might be the right answer. You see, like, even though there's a lot of like need to exile stuff, you don't see cards like Lion Sash or Unlicensed Hearth seeing regular play. So if you love this card, craft 1. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's definitely format context where this card doesn't see play just because there's too many other good cards that you can run in that spot and you never are sinking mana into it. You're just trying to curve. So yeah, for me, card is a 1 and 0 if you're cynical. Painful Quandary, 3 black enchantment rare. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless they discard a card. Oh yeah, this is a reprint. Haven't seen this card in a long time. Definitely a niche card and a pretty good commander card at times. Very fun. But yeah, I don't see this making it into standard. It wasn't a big hit in the past, and standard's only gotten faster and more aggressive with a best of 1 focus of arena. So do not craft, I would say, a 0. Next up is Phyrexian Fleshgorger. 7 for a Phyrexian Worm Mythic with Menace, Lifelink, 7/5, and Ward. Pay life equal to its power. Nasty. The prototype, though, is 1 and a black for a 3/3. So 3 mana, 3/3 artifact creature, Menace, Lifelink, Ward, pay life equal to its power. If they target it, they have to pay 3 life. Seems okay. Doesn't seem great. Also doesn't seem like it does much the turn you play it unless they actually go ahead and target it. So the question is, do they have to target it to win the game? Lifelink is a strong ability, but the card becomes a lot less playable if the opponent's creatures are going tall or particularly wide. If they just trade some creatures for it, like, are you happy? It does shut down a lot of like 2 power and below creatures that want to attack, because attacking into a lifelinker is usually terrible, but it's also got Menace, so it can crunch. This is a hard card to evaluate. There's also this fun bit where if they target the Fleshgorger, the ward trigger goes on the stack. You can respond to that by growing its power. Cast a giant growth just as an example, but all kinds of ways to grow the power. And then they have to pay more than they thought they would. But they probably just will, because they're, in that sense, they're probably 2-for-1ing you, because their removal spell also got some kind of a pump spell. But it's a really good card with kind of generic Anthem effects that make it more harder to kill. That said, its creature type isn't very good. I'm going to say 0 on this card. And it's mostly because I don't see it being enough impact. I definitely think it's playable and we'll find some spots. It's a pretty cool reanimation target, as at that size it's very hard to deal with but must be dealt with. Still, I'm going to say 0. It is a mythic. I try to be conservative with your mythic wildcards. So, Phyrexia Fleshgorger, you're gonna hang out. You're gonna wait. You've got to wait. Razor Lash Transmigrant. 2 for a 3/1 rare artifact creature zombie. There's a type, and it can't block. Yes. 4 black, return this from the graveyard to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. This ability costs 4 less to activate if an opponent controls 4 or more non-basic lands. Interesting. And you can do it over and over. So it's only if the opponent controls 4 non-basic lands, which is reasonable, probably a little over half your games that can happen. Mostly because the monocolored decks aren't as good in Arena as they used to, although they'll always be popular. Card is pretty bad though if you're against a monocolored deck. It's just 2 mana for a 3/1 that can't block. But it's pretty sweet for black to get back a 4/2 every turn from the graveyard. It just feels like there will be enough ways to exile this that you can't really abuse it. I can see 1 or 2 of these getting played, but I think Underdog is significantly better, so it's hard for me to endorse it. So because Underdog is that good, and because you've probably already crafted Underdog, and because Underdog, when you start branching into multiple colors, isn't even a 4 of in a lot of decks, I'm going to say don't craft this. The biggest thing, 2 things. If there is somehow now a zombie deck, then this card is a lot better because zombies didn't have a lot of playables in their type. And if there is an artifact deck specifically, if the artifact type matters big time, this becomes a much more playable card and you may need to craft it. Transmogrant Altar is 3 colorless for an artifact uncommon. For a black, you can tap and sacrifice a creature to add 3 colorless. For 2 and a tap, you can sacrifice a creature to create a 3/3 colorless zombie artifact creature token, activate only as a sorcery. Worth noting, you can sacrifice at instant speed for the mana, although it's hard to use the mana at instant speed. You can only do the zombie thing as a sorcery. It is fun to have altar effects. It is fun to figure out how to turn your small resources like token creatures into bigger ones. So people will try to make that happen. I am curious where that will fall. Like, does Anvil need something like this? Not really. The fact that you have to have mana and then tap this definitely reduces the overall effectiveness. If it was just tap sack a creature, add 3 colorless, it would be busted. The mana gate on it is a significant issue. There might be a place though where you can go big by playing this after playing some small creatures and then turn those into, say, those prototype cards where now you're casting the large side much earlier than expected. But if you didn't draw your altar, you just play the cheaper prototype side. This card is a big maybe for me, and it's an uncommon, so it's not really about how many to craft. It's about what a cool card to look out for. What are you going to do with it? Leave me some comments if you've got some great ideas. Transmogrant's Crown is 2 colorless for an artifact equipment rare. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw a card. What a cool thing to attach to all kinds of creatures. The equip is 2 or a black. Yeah, this seems really good to me. 1 mana to equip something like this that can draw cards over and over seems very strong. I don't want too many of them, but it's hard to see how 1 of in a deck isn't just kind of a good value add. If you are being beaten to death, if the opponent is attacking you quickly, and this is your 2-drop, you feel very bad. But that does probably mean you're building your deck badly or keeping bad hands, because if you have this card in your hand and no creatures that cost 1 or 2, what are you doing with your life? You are probably playing bad Magic. So yeah, like take the current mono black deck. Does this make the cut? As a 1 of, I hope you can find some room for it. It seems like you can't go too wrong with this. Whether it's attached to any of your creatures, the opponent has to kill them. They're powerful, they're dangerous, and this dealing more damage is so good that you'll probably draw 2 or 3 cards off of it in a game. So the only thing that holds it back is you don't want to draw too many, because then they don't do a ton in multiples. It's too clunky. Yes, if you equip them, you would draw 2 cards, but it's just too much mana and too clunky to equip multiple and to play and equip multiples of these. So craft 1, try it in a bunch of black decks. Probably good. Taking a mid-game break before we dive into the red cards, a mid-set review break, to talk about the Dragon Rider token and playmat launched at coolstuffinc.com/CGB. I am thrilled and honored to be on one of the most beautiful pieces of dragon art I have ever seen anywhere by Andre Garcia. He absolutely crushed it, and it is unbelievable that that's me riding the frickin' dragon. The dragon token will be coming with pre-orders of a future set, but right now the only way to get this dragon token is to also get the playmat. It's a bundle that we've cooked up together. It's a special foil version of the dragon token, and a gorgeous version of the playmat. It's high quality with stitched edges. We think you guys are really going to love it. We've only made 500. They have a gold first edition printed on both the token and the playmat, and it will hopefully arrive by Christmas if you get your pre-orders in. So go to coolstuffinc.com/CGB, my own landing page on the site. That's so cool. And use the promo code CGB5 because that gives you a discount and supports the channel. So yeah, promo code CGB5, coolstuffinc.com/CGB. Get the CGB Dragon Rider token and the CGB Dragon Rider playmat. It's all things CGB coming to you thanks to coolstuffinc.com. So check it out. Thank you. Covert Go Shill out. Back to the set review. Arms Race. Sing it with me, guys. This ain't a sneak attack. It's a goddamn arms race. What was that? That's what happens when your voice is doing too much set review. Sorry. I'll stop. I'll never do that again. I promise. Anyway, Arms Race is definitely not sneak attack. It is 3 in a red for an enchantment, uncommon, 3 in a red. You may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. The artifact gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. It's 4 mana to play it, and it's 4 mana to use it. At that point, you've invested 8 mana into getting an artifact till end of turn. And maybe in larger formats, in Commander, some decks, that's worth it. In Standard, I don't see a world where that will ever be worth it. I just wanted to basically talk about the card because Fallout Boy. That's why. That's the reason. Next up is Bitter Reunion. 1 in a red for an enchantment, common. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. For 1 in a sack, creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. I love this card for many reasons. 1, Bitter Reunion, because Cathartic Reunion had the art of Chandra and her mom coming back together, having a nice reunion, reuniting, one might say. And then this is a much nastier version, so it's kind of cool to see that flavor across multiple cards. Being an enchantment with this Thrill of Possibility type effect, though, opens a lot of different possibilities. So, for example, you're never happy if you played a Bitter Reunion and you end up sacrificing later to an Invoke Despair. Or what if you play a Bitter Reunion and you use it to trigger your Kami of Transience and your Generous Visitor or your Rite of Harmony? There's a lot of things that being an enchantment gets you that being a sorcery or instant does not. And when we find ways to take advantage of such things, it feels smart and cool. So I expect this to be played in a number of interesting spots throughout its time in the format. It also takes that spot that Meat Hook Massacre held of just being this random enchantment that sits on the battlefield for your soul transfer to do both modes. Bitter Reunion can be that enchantment, which can be very nice. Next up is Brotherhood's End. No! Not your brother. 1 and a red sorcery, rare. Choose 1, 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. Hitting planeswalkers is nice. That will come up from time to time. Being able to kill a Liliana and the creatures that came before it is very good against mono black if the Liliana ticked down to make you sacrifice your first creature. Destroying all artifacts can hit Bank Busters, as well as if there's an artifact deck in the format, can absolutely hose that. And I think that the card will see some play. You're looking for something like a big red deck, something that's kind of control-y and has some big over-the-top plays that doesn't want to play too much early to the board, especially for best of one. You're talking about like big red or like Jeskai with a ton of planeswalkers on top, super friends, something like that. So I'm going to craft 2 and we're going to go from there. The next card is Draconic Destiny. Like me, I now have a Draconic Destiny, and it is 1 and a red for an aura. It is a mythic aura. Wow. Enchant creature gets +1/+1 and has flying and haste and 1. This creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it's a dragon in addition to its other types. Somebody cast this on me. Let's go. When enchanted creature dies, return the destiny to owner's hand. That's pretty cool. You remember Angelic Destiny. I think it's a callback to that card, which is very, very fun. That was also a mythic aura that turned something into an angel. It's only a +1/+1. The haste is a little sus, because when are you going to play this and a creature the same turn, maybe in a much longer game? And the fire breathing becomes harder to use the more expensive those kind of lines get. So I don't see it yet. I don't really want to be spending my 3 mana on getting this onto the battlefield in a world of so much instant speed removal, because even though when the creature dies you return this to the hand, it does have to attach to the creature to make that a possibility. And if they have Go for the Throat mana up, can you really play this card? So this is a don't craft as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to craft 0, but it's a cool card and I'm glad it exists. Just wish it gave, like, you know, I don't know, +5/+5. Let's go. Feldon Ronum Excavator is 1 in red for a 2/2 haste legend human artificer at rare, and the Feldon can't block. Now whenever Feldon is dealt damage, exile that many cards from the top of your library. Choose one of them until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. Is that a Robber of the Rich, or is it something a lot worse? Not being able to block is definitely but I think that the aggro decks will try it, at least 1 or 2 copies. I don't know if you play 4 because of the legendariness, and you don't need 4. You have the adversary, the bloodthirsty adversary. So you have plenty of 2 mana 2/2 haste that's already proven and playable and good. But if you want a little extra of that effect, 1 or 2 of these will do the job. The opponent will probably have to deal damage to it at some point. Like if they trade with it, you're really happy. If this might create a chump attack situation where you're attacking hoping they block to get a card, like, you know, they have Sheldred on the battlefield. Are they going to block this? Probably not. Unfortunately for you, they still have Sheldred on the battlefield. So yeah, Feldon I'm lukewarm on. I would say craft 1 and we'll see how it goes. There might be a style of deck I haven't thought of yet where it fits better. It is also kind of cool that if you can find a way to ping it every turn, just deal 1 damage to it, you get to exile a card and you might be able to play it. Maybe there's something there. Mechanized Warfare is 1 in a red for an enchantment rare. If a red or artifact source you control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much +1. A red or artifact source you control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent an opponent controls. So it doesn't work against you as many of like Furnace of Wrath type effects have in the past. That's nice. It doesn't double the damage, it deals 1. But I mean, we're not really dealing in a world where red deals a bunch of like, you know, huge chunks of damage at once like Embercleave did. It's a lot of like, here's my Phoenix chick hitting for 1, and the trigger from my Thundering Raiju hits you for 1 or 2, and you know, stuff like that. Squee goes wide. So yeah, I'm kind of wondering if this makes it in a go wide aggressive red deck. There are a ton of cheap red creatures and you get kind of a Cavalcade of Calamity vibe, but the creature or the red source or the artifact source still has to actually deal damage to the opponent, which is a tall ask. I think that some people are going to try this card. I don't recommend it. I think that you're better off running Squeeze and Reckless Stormseekers and Chandra in those spots than running this enchantment. Now, it may turn out that the removal of the format lines up in a way that makes this and a bunch of 1-mana creatures in red a good deck, and we'll try that deck. Maybe it wins a lot. But I would craft 0 unless you really miss Cavalcade of Calamity and you want to try throwing this into a deck with all the red 1-drops you can find. Mishra, Excavation Prodigy, 2 in a red for a 2/1 haste human artificer uncommon. 1 tap, discard a card to draw. Okay, it's a rummager. Whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, add red. This only triggers once a turn. Ooh. So if we have a lot of artifacts in deck, we can make mana with this. A little bit of a mana boost and rummaging through our deck. But what artifacts do we want to just chuck into the graveyard? That's a good question. The haste is also a little unusual because of how much mana it takes to even do the thing. Like what, turn 4 you're going to play this and then use the ability, and then you're going to discard an artifact and take 2 red, and you draw a card and you have a 2-mana artifact on the battlefield and a tap 2/1. None of that sounds like it lines up well for the current standard format, does it? It sounds very mediocre. I mean, you don't have to worry about the crafting guide because it's an uncommon, but I don't think this card looks very good. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that we find a cool artifact deck because this might be an important part of it, but it's hard to picture how it all comes together. Mishra's command is X red sorcery. Choose 2. Choose target player. They may discard up to X cards. Then they draw a card for each card discarded this way. weird. I guess so that you're choosing targets. Yeah, I've seen this before. They don't want you to choose a mode that targets a creature and then have the whole spell fizzled if the creature dies. That's why it's targeting. All right. This spell deals X damage to target creature. This spell deals X damage to target planeswalker. And target creature gets +X+O and gains haste until end of turn. Is this the card that brings back Hinata? Hinata just lurking in the format, hoping that we get a reprint of a Magma Opus or something like it. This card, I think, is still 2 mana intensive, even with Hinata. For 1 red, like, you have 2 targets, it costs 2 less, so you get it up to 3, and then it's dealing like 3 damage to target creature, or 2 damage to target creature, and X to a planeswalker, and you rummage 2 cards. It's not terrible, but it's also a sorcery, and these commands as sorceries are really starting to drag me down. This card feels all these modes feel kind of mediocre to me, although it's close to a cheaper Shatterskull Smashing if you're hitting a creature and a planeswalker. But doing that at sorcery speed means those cards probably already got value, and you're playing from behind, so that scares me. I'm lukewarm on this card. Part of me wants to try 2, and part of me says just don't craft it because the sorcery speed is really killing it. I'm going to go with 0 on the conservative side. I think these commands are made to be interesting and strong effects in limited, but they don't seem like they have a mind towards constructed play unless formats break in really specific ways. Next card is Monastery Swiftspear. This is a reprint at uncommon. A lot of you know it. 1 red for a 1/2 haste with prowess. Huge player in older formats, and was a huge player in standard in its time. It is definitely a return to the evil that is mono red, and I expect mono red to move in a more spell slinger direction. I don't know that you want to run a Monastery Swiftspear in a deck where the only spells are 4 Play with Fire and 4 Lightning Strike. However, you might want to run a Monastery Swiftspear in a deck that includes those cards, as well as Kumano Faces Kakazan, as well as Fable the Mirror Breaker, because prowess is whenever you play a non-creature spell, remember, as well as Chandra, Dress to Kill. You know, all of this stuff kind of comes together, and then you use Bloodthirsty Adversary and you kick it and you cast an instant from your graveyard and you trigger this again. But also be on the lookout for cheap cards that draw cards. You know, Consider is in the format, and so is Delver. Maybe we get a card that scries for a very cheap 1 mana cost, and that makes this card really interesting in the future, along with Delver. But yeah, this card is something to keep an eye on. All kinds of decks are probably going to try to break this very quickly. It is a fan favorite for you weirdo aggro mages. Obliterating Bolt is 1 in red for a sorcery that does 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. If the creature or planeswalker would die, exile instead. It's Thundering Rebuke, which saw a lot of play, except now the creature or planeswalker gets exiled. So it's an upgraded Thundering Rebuke. That was a 4 of in a lot of decks at the World Championship. So I expect this one to see play. The biggest thing holding it back is frickin' Sheoldred, and it's 5 toughness. That's where Obliterating Bolt doesn't quite get there, and you feel bad. But I still think you're going to see a bit of play here and there from this 2 mana sorcery. Over the Top, it better live up to this name. It's 5 in a red sorcery at rare. Each player reveals a number of cards from the top of their library equal to the number of non-land permanents they control. Put all permanent cards they reveal this way onto the battlefield and put the rest into their graveyard. So if you are like an all permanence deck except for Over the Top, you can, and maybe you make a lot of tokens as well, because tokens count here, right? Yes, they do. Then maybe, yeah, if you're just good at putting a whole bunch of stuff on your battlefield, just decorating it with all kinds of artifacts and creatures and tokens and whatnot, Over the Top might get a huge chunk of your deck onto the battlefield. Now your opponent's going to do it too, but if they have a bunch of spells in their deck, they're probably not going to hit as well. This doesn't strike me as a standard card. It strikes me as a meme, and I might meme with it a little. We'll see. I'm going to recommend you craft 0 for standard, but I have a feeling I will see plenty of this card both in play queue, in memery decks, and in commander and casual formats for sure. Tyrant of Kerr Ridges is 4 and a red for a dragon 4/5 rare. Flying. When it enters the battlefield, it does 4 damage to any target. That is a solid ETB. And then it has fire breathing. 6 mana is a lot. Maybe there's a way to play it on the cheaper, but 4 damage to any target is a lot too. Like, when you drop this, you're probably going to kill planeswalkers. You're probably going to kill important creatures. But once again, does not kill She-Aldred. Why would you? Why would anything ever kill that card? This card may see play here and there. I'm going to say don't craft because I don't see a lot of 6-drops. And when you are playing a 6-drop, I'm worried that your 4 damage won't be enough to do what you need it to do. It's not like you're going to be able to take out a Rafine with this at a reasonable time, right? So I'm gonna say 0, but this is a very cool dragon. I like that it's in the format, and it might see play in some weird spots. Next, we have Visions of Phyrexia, 2 red enchantment rare. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. I love those kind of enchantments. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't play a card from exile this turn, create a tapped Power Stone token. I don't think it works for control decks because exiling counter spells is super cringy, even if you are turning them into Power Stones. And I don't think it's fast enough for standard. It's too expensive. I love cards like this in my commander decks and sometimes even in my brawl decks, but I think the format is way too fast and snowballing in standard for you to be casting something like this that does nothing until your next upkeep. You do get the Power Stone at the beginning of your first end step, which is notable, unless you somehow played a card from exile that turn. So that's something to keep in mind. But I'm mainly interested in this card in my Prosper, Historic Brawl, and Commander decks. Mishra's Research Desk is 1 for an artifact, and it's an uncommon. For 1 and a tap, sacrifice it, exile the top 2 of your library, choose 1. You may play it until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. Notable that we can also use it on the opponent's turn. We don't have to do it on our turn. Yeah, pretty cool. And then there's Unearth. Oh, so you bring it back, and then you have to pay 1 and tap to sacrifice again, and you exile the next 2 cards and you choose another. So it's good selection. It's a pretty dirtily artifact. It's a good artifact if you can recur it. It's a good artifact. You don't really want to sacrifice it for other effect. You really want the 2-card ability probably, but you could sacrifice it to bolt if you have to. It's probably great with Anvil. Hard to picture more ways that you would love to like activate your Anvil. It reminds me a lot of Synthesizer, but probably a little better because you have more control over like playing it early and then activating it later to get the effect. The Unearth means it has a lot of value. This is definitely a card I want to play with. It might be slow and clunky when all is said and done, but it's an uncommon, so you're not out much for trying it out. Definitely want to try it with Anvil type decks. Phyrexian Dragon Engine. This is 3 colorless for a rare Phyrexian Dragon. Artifact creature, double strike 2/2. When it enters the battlefield from your graveyard, you may discard your hand if you do draw 3 with an Unearth of 3 red. Are you ready for more? Because it melds with Mishra, claimed by Gix. I'm gonna analyze this on its own, and then we'll get to what the big Mishra does. On its own, this card is okay. The Unearth ability, the fact that you bring it back and have it there for 1 turn to draw, and you draw 3 cards doing it, is very, very good. This card is probably better being discarded than cast, chucked to a Fable the Mirror Breaker or something like that. But that's okay. You can still cast it, and it's generic mana, so it's easy to cast if you need to fill your 3 mana spot. Double strike is something that works with almost any kind of buff, obviously, and can be better than people expect it to be. So this card is all right already, and as we get into the other cards, it only gets better, so I'm already optimistic about it. So the backside, I guess that's the big meld. Let's do the Mishra first. So Mishra, claimed by Gix, is what this card melds with. It's 2 and a black red for a 3/5 legendary creature, Phyrexian Human Artificer Mythic. Whenever you attack, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of attacking creatures. That's cool. If Mishra, claimed by Gix, and a creature named Phyrexian Dragon Engine are attacking, and you both own and control them, just rulesy text really, exile them, then meld them into Mishra, lost to Phyrexia. So when Mishra finally just joins with it, somehow makes out with his Dragon Engine and 2 become 1, it enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. Here's what you get. A 9/9 legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Artificer. And whenever Mishra, lost to Phyrexia, enters the battlefield or attacks, you choose 3 of these freaking modes. There's so many. There's 6 modes. Target opponent discards 2 cards. 3 damage to any target. Destroy an artifact or planeswalker. Creatures you control gain menace and trample until end of turn. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Create 2 tap Power Stone tokens. So, should you craft Phyrexian Dragon Engine? Hold on, I need a drink. I've had a look at the meld cards before doing this review because I had to figure out how I was even going to talk about them and try to explain them. And in doing so, I have a strategy for how I would recommend crafting them. Because I am not sure, it doesn't seem like meld is going to be a reliable ability in the format. It seems like the removal in the format is often instant speed and multi-dimensional. Think Infernal Grasp, think Go for the Throat, think the new 2-mana white exile, and then they can play it later for 2. Like, all of those things definitely imply that melding is going to be hard and probably off the table. Melding is something that will happen sometimes, but not all the time. I think what you want to do is you want to take the cheaper of the meld cards, and if it is good, like decent in your deck on its own, you want to play a few more of the cheaper one and then a few less of the expensive one. So is this card good on its own? I think it is. So how I would recommend it is craft 3 Phyrexian Dragon Engines. Craft 2 Mishra Claimed by Gix. Also, if possible, try to build some things into your library like Cruelty of Gix, or something that lets you get a creature from your graveyard back onto the battlefield so you can get back your Mishra. You know, you also think of Cruelty of Gix and you think, wow, you can tutor for the Mishra and then you can reclaim the Dragon Engine, and it really like puts together a meld right there. But it's possible that you just want a very toolboxy approach. If you're cynical, maybe you get 2 Dragon Engines and 1 Mishra, because this isn't going to happen that often. But when it does, it is over the top game breaking. It is that powerful, and I hope that they put an appropriate amount of care to it on the Arena client with a sweet animation, and just getting to pick all those modes. Another problem with Arena, they're probably going to scoop the moment you do it. Maybe you don't even get to choose your modes. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe paradox of choice is a problem. But my recommendation, and it's going to be similar for the other meld cards, I believe, is to craft 3 Phyrexian Dragon Engines, because I do think it's a very decent card on its own, and there are decks that will want it. Not a lot, but there are definitely decks that will want it, especially if there's an artifact deck. And then craft 2 Mishra Claimed by Gix, and it'll come up sometimes. You don't need to just force feed 4 of each, because I think that's going to lead you to believing both cards suck, and it's going to waste more wild cards. So that's my take on this meld card. I hope some of you find it interesting, useful, or helpful. Skitter Beam Battalion is 9 for an artifact construct. I bet it has prototype. It does have prototype. It's a trample haste. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, create 2 tokens that are copies of it, and it's a 4/4. If you cast it, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. 9 mana for 12, total of 12 across 3 bodies, trample and haste. Dang. It's also an ETB trigger, so you can reanimate it to get that effect. It's not a, or no, it says if you cast it. Sorry, I'm so used to, like, when I look for an ETB trigger, and a lot of people do this, you read enters the battlefield and you stop reading. But yeah, it does have if you cast it clause. Okay, you can't just reanimate it. Anyway, the prototype says you can do this for 5 mana. That is a 2/2, a 2/2, and a 2/2 with trample and haste. I don't see how that's better than a lot of other options. It's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't love it. If you could reanimate it or like cheat it to get these effects, I'd be way more into it. But I've got to say, I'm pretty let down that you can't. So I'm going to give a 0 on the Skitter Beam Battalion. I think the rate's just okay in a world where we need a great rate. Audacity is an app, like a computer program we use to make a podcast. Nope, that's not it. Audacity is 1 green for an enchantment aura, uncommon enchant creature. Enchant creature gets +2/+0 and has trample, getting some Rancor flashbacks. And when Audacity is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. And then you immediately think, oh yeah, there's already an enchantment deck that's very popular, and this is another uncommon card that can go into that deck. For a generous visitor, for Kami of Transience, etc. And we already saw some other cheap auras that work that way. If we get an Enchantress effect that says whenever you play an enchantment, draw a card, you know, like a creature that does that, not a spell like Rite of Harmony, we might have a really good Enchantress deck. But as it is right now, like, that deck will be just fine. The good value here. It's still going to be weak to exile effects, and it already was. So we'll see how popular exile removal is. But as long as mono black's around, they don't have as much exile as they used to. And I think this card could definitely see play in the enchantment piles. Awaken the Woods is X green mythic sorcery. Create X 1/1 green forest dryad land creature tokens. Oh, what is it? Dryad Arbor is a land that's also a creature. So it's ramp and creatures at the same time because they can tap for mana. They are affected by summoning sickness. That is helpful reminder text that is often forgotten on Dryad Arbor. Yeah, but yeah, this is a cool card. Say that you do it for 3, you create 3 1/1s that tap for 3 mana. It's a mythic, which is a little surprising. I'm curious if this card will hold up in standard. It seems a little bit slow for that format, but there might be a big mana land effect. Like this with landfall is sweet, by the way, if you've thought about it in any type of a landfall situation. So this card will probably fit in somewhere. It will be huge in all types of commander decks, which is why it's going to command probably a juicy price tag for a while. But in standard, I have trouble seeing where it fits in, and I'm going to say don't craft it. You can craft it for other formats for sure if you play those, but in standard, just wait. See if somebody breaks it. Bushwhack is 1 green for a sorcery uncommon. Choose one, search for a basic, or it goes in your hand. Or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. I love this. Sometimes you need a land and you go get a land. This is a really sweet pair of modes that you don't see on a card together very often. The fight is also important because sometimes you need to remove stuff. Will this be good enough for mono green type decks? I think the biggest problem is you really want to play a 1-drop creature. You don't want to fetch a land, and you also want to play on curve, which fetching a land is basically like having a tapped land that turn because you had to put mana into it. While the card is never dead, I'm not convinced that the card is ever really alive. And if fight is what you want in your format, you just build in like tail swipe and you're probably in a better position. But it's cool that the card exists. I like them trying modal stuff that doesn't always go together, like return to nature. Like, all of that seems to go together great. I like some of this stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see on the same card that makes the modal cards great for best of 1. Cittanul Stalwart is 1 green for a common 1/1 elf druid soldier, and it says tap an untapped artifact or creature you control to make a mana of any color. So it's a Jaspera Sentinel type effect. As long as you have a creature or artifact to play on turn 2, then you go up to 4 mana the next turn, and you might still be able to make a 1 mana on that turn 2 and do something with it. We saw that Jaspera Sentinel was a very useful card in the format, and while this isn't exactly the same, and it doesn't have the sneaky reach and the 2 toughness, it does have the ability to tap an artifact, and that may come up. Bankbuster as a turn 2 play comes to mind, where you want a lot of mana when you're a Bankbuster deck because you need to activate your Bankbuster and also try to interfere with the board. So I could see the Stalwart being a card that gets played. Fade from History is 2 and a green for a sorcery at rare. It says each player who controls an artifact or enchantment creates a 2/2 bear creature token, then destroy all artifacts and enchantments. They don't get a bear for each artifact or enchantment that's destroyed, like you might be used to on other cards. Rampage of the Clans comes to mind. So this card in man, they need a lot of this to punish people for just throwing a million mana artifacts on the battlefield in formats like Commander. This could be a very important card in Standard if the artifact deck starts to take off. This is a neat card to not forget about, as it's just kind of hanging out as a safety valve. And it's got cute bears on it. So, I mean, that's cool. That's awesome. Should you craft it? I don't know. We need to see the artifact deck do a lot. I'm definitely going to get it for my commander decks, but as far as crafting it on Arena, I'm not 100% positive that this is the jam. But then it also does say enchantment, doesn't it? And taking out an enchantment deck's like pile of enchantments seems really good. Craft 1? Maybe for sideboard. If you play best of 1, craft 0, wait and see if a deck can get totally hosed by this before you craft it. Yeah, we'll leave it there. Fauna Shaman is a reprint. You may already have it in your collection. I believe it was in a historic anthology. 1 and a green, 2/2. Elf Shaman rare, green tap, discard a creature card. Search for a creature card, put in your hand. So it's a tutor attached to an elf. If you discard a creature, you can go get any creature you want. How will this go in standard? I think it's really slow for standard, but I wouldn't be surprised. Don't ever be surprised if it fits in somewhere where you have a few very specific silver bullet creatures you want to go fetch that deal with specific problems, or you just want to turn your late game, I drew a mana dork, into, oops, I drew a Titan of Industry. I wouldn't craft more than one to start with. It's a lot of the times, in a very snowbally format like we have, Fauna Shaman is a 2-mana 2/2, and you wish to God you had played something stronger. So I would craft one. It's definitely useful in a lot of historic brawl decks as well. Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia is 2 and a green for a rare 2/3 Elf Druid Scout legend. Tap it for 2 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. All right, you know, we can play creatures. We've done this before. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on Gwenna and untap it. Ooh, that can generate a lot of mana. So you're casting big creatures with this, untapping it, making it larger, and you can use the mana again if you want to activate your creature. There probably is a place for you. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but the first card I want to play with this is like, you picture some of the huge creatures in the format. There's Workshop Warchief, there's Tovalar's Huntmaster, and there's Titan of Industry. All of those are very powerful value cards that the biggest question mark is whether or not you can live long enough to get the mana to cast them. Now, on its own, if you play this as a 2-mana 2/3, it's not like you're taking over the board, and nobody will be afraid of it on its own. But if there is a deck that can reliably run those creatures I talked about, what you may see is that this is a removal demanding 3-drop, and those have been getting played. If the opponent has to stop what they're doing to play a removal spell, then their snowball has to wait a turn, and maybe you're able to just keep marching through with ramp spells and then play your big creatures later, and they use removal on Gwenna so they don't have it for your larger creatures. That could be very strong. I want to try out this card. I would craft 2. If you're cynical, craft 1. It's a legendary. Maybe you can make a sweet historic brawl deck. I'm going to try to make a historic brawl deck that can untap it multiple times. That sounds fun. But maybe it is closer to a commander card than a standard card, but I still think you should give it a try. Obstinate Baloth is a reprint. It's a 4-mana 4/4 creature beast, uncommon, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. If a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard Obstinate Baloth, you put it onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your graveyard. This card was very strategically put in this set to be like, well, if Liliana of the Veil is absolutely busted and spammed all the way across the arena, as it was for a while, well, guess what? We're gonna put in Obstinate Baloth, and you can, when you plus Liliana, if Obstinate Baloth comes down, it's a gotcha. It's an absolute gotcha. Same true with Graveyard Trespasser. Target your Trespasser with a removal spell. Ward, discard a card. Okay, I discard the Baloth. How about Dem Apples? It even blocks your other Trespasser. So yeah, I think that this card will play a role. I don't know if it will slide into best of one. I don't know if it's that good, but it's a decent card. And if your deck wants to go late into the game and you need a 4-drop and you're sick of being forced to discard things that are cool, I think this is a really cool card to turn to. What the cutie is that? Teething Wormlet. 1 green for a 1/1 rare worm that's holding a bird cage? I don't know what's happening here. Ringing a bell? I'm here for it though. Whatever. Teething Wormlet has Death Touch as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. Ooh, green artifact deck? Weird. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn, put a counter on it. Okay, the Death Touch thing is kind of the bonus text, and the growing ability is the better text. If you have ways to make, you know, Power Stone tokens and treasures, this thing can just keep growing. This and Galagreators, right? You're getting +1/+1 counters, you're getting treasures, you're gaining life. Like, I think this and Galagreators is a pretty sick curve. That plus, you know, artifacts, ways to make artifacts. You need more than just Galagreators in the deck to make this good. Are there enough artifacts? That's going to be the part I think I don't understand. I have to sit down and actually look over the artifacts in the set, because the artifact power is kind of slim pickings. It drops off really fast after Reckoner Bankbuster in standard before this set. Kamigawa has a number of interesting types, like artifacts stapled to all kinds of creatures and things, but I don't know if there's enough for the Teething Wormlet. This card, if the artifact deck curves out in a very powerful way, could be a 4 of, and I'm going to tell you to wait. I'm going to give it a craft 0, and then when I make a deck with it, if we are smashing everybody and it looks like your speed, then move it in craft. I will probably test it at least somewhat early in the format. Titania, Voice of Gaia. Are you ready? Are you ready for more melding, everybody? This is 1 and a green for a legendary creature elemental with reach. Whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. Then there's a whole bunch of meld text, and it goes with a land named Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. Okay, so on its own, 3 mana, 3/4 reach. Whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. Putting land cards in your graveyard and gaining life is very doable. There's the lands from New Capenna that sacrifice themselves. There's always cards, you know, that are kind of like sack lands that get you what you want, although we could really use a Fabled Passage in this format quite a bit. Maybe just reprint fetch lands. They'll never reprint fetch lands, not in like a standard set. I don't think they'll ever do that again because of all the problems with fetch lands. But yeah, there's also ways to discard lands. Think Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Gaining life from that can be very powerful. It's an okay body on its own. Now let's evaluate it based on the land. Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, is a land, rare, taps for a green. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary green creature. That's kind of a neat ability. So obviously Titania, but there are a number of other legendary creatures floating about. It does have to be a green creature, so keep that in mind. 2 green, tap. Create a 2/2 bear creature token and mill 3 cards. Activate only as a sorcery. The activate only as a sorcery is rare, but it's a good ability. Or rare? Lame. I meant to say it's lame. The activate as a sorcery is lame. I want to hold up my mana. What's wrong with that? But anyway, that's a cool ability. If you run out of stuff to do with your mana, just cranking out bears can get you there, and it ensures that a green deck often has a lot of stuff on the battlefield. That card may be good even in a deck without Titania at all. So I really like Argoth, Sanctum of Nature quite a bit, and the fact that it mills also means you can mill lands when you have Titania and also gain life from that interaction. But then we get to meldy time. Now, when does it meld? At the beginning of your upkeep is the meld point. Now, this is different. It's going to be important to keep track of with the meld card. For Mishra, I believe it was combat, or like when they both attack. And here, it's at the beginning of your upkeep. So you have to play both of them, and they have to survive a turn. What do we get? We get Titania Gaia Incarnate. Bruh, she looked mad. Elemental Avatar, Star, Vigilance, Reach, Trample, and Haste. That's a lot of abilities. Power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. This could be game over. This could be a green fireball. When it enters the battlefield, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Holy crap. 3 green, put 4 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste. It's still a land. That's a lot. That is a lot. That is another creature that, if they don't remove it, can definitely end the game by putting together 2 cards that are pretty affordable. One is 3 mana, one is a land. So it's definitely the minimal mana investment for the meld cards. You just have to play a land and play this creature, and then it might do this thing. That seems really good. And this land isn't legendary. That's pretty good too. It does enter the battlefield tapped a good amount, so that's something that might hold this back. It does depend on the rest of the deck, I guess. I'm going to try to build a Slogurk deck with these, though. That sounds absolutely sweet. I am going to say 3 Argoths, 2 Titanias. I'm going to stick to my theme. I think it's a good approach for kind of a balanced look at the deck. If those of you out there that are whales just really, really, really want to create a big angry tree lady, then you can craft 4 of each and go for it. But I think making good decks is going to require a little more discipline. So I like 2 of you and 3 of you. Yep, 5 wild cards total instead of the 8 it would be to just go 4/4. And I think a good amount of the time, like every one in 12, 15 games, you'll get to pull off and do the thing. And you might say, oh, is that even worth it then? I think so. For one thing, it's cool. Like, quests in Magic are meant to be fun. The game is still meant to be fun. And 2, the cards are fine on their own. It's a land as well. You're not eating too many spots in your deck, and you can build the rest of your deck around all kinds of synergies. So yeah, we'll stick to 2 of the mythic and 3 of the rare. Our next card is Titania's Command. This is 4 and a green sorcery at rare. Choose 2. Exile a player's graveyard and gain 1 life for each card exiled that way. Nice. Search your library for 2 lands. Put them on the battlefield tapped. Okay. 2/2/2 bear tokens. Nice. And put 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Looking at this, I like the idea of ramping to 7 for your Titan of Industry, and making 2/2 bear creature tokens to try to help you survive until the turn when you cast your Titan of Industry. So I can actually see this as the most playable command I've seen so far. Oh, wait a minute. It's 6 mana. I thought it was 5. A lot of the commands were 5. Okay, it's still like 1 mana, like all the commands. It's 1 mana too much to be good value. It's still off-rate flexibility. And I just don't think Best of 1 has a lot of room for that. That took me off the card. Craft 0. Perennial Behemoth is 5 for a 2/7 artifact creature beast rare. You may play lands from your graveyard. The unearth is green. So yeah, you can bring it out of the graveyard and play a land from your graveyard that turn to get a little value. I don't think that's really worth it. This definitely feels commander-ish as a card for me, especially the way that standard is kind of breaking down to have a lot of graveyard hate. So yeah, I am saying craft 0 on the Behemoth. Rootwire Amalgam is 5 for an artifact creature golem mythic 5/5 that has 3 green. Sacrifice it to create an XX colorless golem artifact creature token where X is 3 times the power. What? It gains haste until end of turn, activated as a sorcery. So for 5 mana I can play this, and for 5 mana I can sack this to make a 15/15 with haste. Okay. But it has prototype, which is 1 and a green for a 2/3. So you can play this as a 2/3, and then for 5 mana you can sacrifice it and make a 6/3. Nope. And again, it's a mythic, so save those mythic wild cards. These cards I would say are cool, but definitely seem more like limited cards to me. Simian Simulacrum. 3 colorless for a rare 2/1 artifact creature ape. When it enters the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature you control. That's pretty good. Unearth for 4. That's pretty good. So if you have, I'm thinking of the deck we wanted to play that has that 1 drop that triggers off artifacts entering the battlefield, whose name I already forgot because it was like 10 minutes ago, and then Galagreeters, and then you play this as like your creature on turn 3, and you put 2+1/+1 counters on one of those, and it is an artifact, so it triggers everything, and then it's a 2/1, and if something happens to it, you unearth it and you get 2 more counters. It is, very much like, as long as you have any other creature, you get an artifact entering the battlefield ability, and you get 4 power and 3 toughness for 3 mana. There's definitely a world where that is pretty good. It definitely adds to like a snowbally culture in Magic, where, especially if you have something that trigger off the +1/+1 counters that you put on something. And then there's the Unearth, which means you get to do it again, which makes it a value play as well. So yeah, this is a very snowbally card that is probably really good, depending on what your 2-drop is. But I mean, even if your 2-drop is a Denic, and now you have a 4/5 lifelinker on turn 3, like, how does the opponent even roll with that? So I think this card might be better than it looks. I'm cynical about crafting it. I struggle with that kind of thing. I love cards like Briarbridge Tracker that had 4 power and 3 toughness and brought value with them, and that card is playable. But I always like the ability to draw a card a little more than just getting back the Unearth. But this kind of has that going for it. How many of this should you craft? I have no idea. I'll tell you straight up, I'm not sure. So, you heard me read the card, make your judgment. I think if you're an aggressive deck that plays green and your 3-drop spot isn't completely loaded and you want a snowball-y type card, I don't know what deck I'm describing necessarily, but this is a great card in it and could easily go up to 4 copies. I'm going to tell you to craft 0. And then we're going to try to prove how good this card is, because I think it could be craft 4. I think it could be that good. 3 generic mana goes in so many decks. If you are a green mage, which I usually am not, the one deck I don't want to put this in is enchantments, which is a really popular deck. So I'm not sure. We need another kind of creature-based deck that wants the +1/+1 counter synergy. And then this is a 4 of. I'm going to tell you 0, because I'm not sure what that deck is going to be and if it's going to be any good, especially with the cards helping enchantments. But could be a 4 of. Deathbloom Ritualist. Deathbloom Ritualist. 3 and a black and a green for a rare 3/5 elf warlock that taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. This seems like a very sweet commander card, and I would not play it in standard because it is 5 mana, do nothing on ETB removal bait. Evangel of Synthesis is a blue and a black 2/3 Phyrexian human cleric. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card and then discard a card. As long as you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, this card gets +1/+0 and has menace. I think this card might be very good with Rafine. I am not sure it's better with Rafine than Tenacious Underdog, Ludwig, Necrogenius, who we used at the very end of the format, and Denick. I am not sure if it is better than those cards, but it gives it a run for its money. The draw a card, discard a card helps set up graveyard synergy, so it works in Reanimator shells. It also helps you hit your land drop and get your colors so that Rafine can come down. It also gives you a card deeper to actually find Rafine on turn 3, which is how those snowballs usually start. Once you add in the +1/+0 and the menace, you are hitting the opponent really hard, and the Rafine clock is faster than ever. So I expect to see this tested in Rafine decks quite a bit. Hajar Loyal Bodyguard is a red and a green for a 3/3, already off to a great start for the Gruul Mages. Legendary creature, human soldier rare. Sacrifice it. Legendary creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. What legendary creatures would possibly use such a card? How about Alana and Elena? That seems really good. That seems really, really good to me. I would love to see Gruul get more into the legendary game, since it seems very focused toward Esper and maybe even a little Bant when you're playing Jodah humans. But now there's another human in red, and I think red should have more cool humans so that you can get kind of Boros synergies and Naya human type decks going. So this card will probably fit into decks of that style at some point in the format. I will tell you, I would not craft it right away, because I'm not sure that the deck that runs this card is going to be better than the decks in other colors, and you might just hit a wall where you crafted this card and then don't play it for a while. But I expect it to be good at some point in standard, so keep an eye on it. Harbin Vanguard Aviator is a white and a blue for a 3/2 human soldier rare with flying. Whenever you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and flying until end of turn. That is a heck of an anthem trigger for a 2 mana creature, and already a 2 mana 3/2 with flying is a kind of rate we don't get in standard very much anymore. This card's going to hit really hard, and it definitely strikes me as amazing with Hopeful Initiate, although Hopeful Initiate a warlock, not a soldier. There are plenty of other soldiers that might want to play along. I think attacking with 5 soldiers is going to be the exception, not the rule. Maybe Adeline can get you there, but I think for the most part you run this because it's 2 mana for a 3/2 flying human, and it's legendary. So that might really matter with cards like Plaza of Heroes, Jodah. You know, we've seen legendary mattering big time. So, good card. How many should you craft? It does look like a blue-white, kind of aggressive, with a little bit of, you know, a little bit of tempo, maybe a little bit of make disappear in it. It looks like that's going to be a deck. If that is the deck for you, I would craft 4. If you're thinking of trying this in Rafine or Jodah or some Legendary Matters decks, I think it's a 2. And if all of that sounds nauseating and you're like, I'd never play a creature before turn 4, like some control mages you may know, you can craft 0. Legions to Ashes is 1 and a white black for a sorcery. Exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls and all tokens that player controls with the same name as that permanent. Boom. A little like, not quite Maelstrom Pulse because it only kills tokens, but it does work on Ob Nixilis and the Ob Nixilis token if Ob ever decides to become a serious card. Legions to Ashes, what do we think of you? Other than that, it's a sorcery that can hit anything, but that is kind of getting outmoded. It like, you really want your you want your removal to be 2 mana instant speed or less. At 3 mana instant speed, Void Rend is making some splashes. You see, like, in competitive decks, like 2 of them, you know, and maybe 1. But Legions to Ashes can kill a nice wide array of tokeny stuff. So I'm waiting to see, are there going to be a lot of token decks? Are people going to go very wide with tokens? If so, this may be the card that you run. However, you still have to kill the thing that makes the tokens, or it might just make more tokens. Hitting an Adeline with this doesn't kill the tokens it left behind. So, craft 1. A lot of these kind of removal answer cards, it's good to have 1 in your deck or collection for when the meta turns, but crafting too many leaves you with weaknesses in your deck. So, 1. Craft 1. All right, I am back from a little food break. Feel free to take one as well if you need to. Mishra, Tamer of Makfawa. Another Mishra. Wait, what? Yeah, there's like 3 Mishra cards in the set and 3 Urza cards. Supposed to represent them at different phases of life. We're traveling through time. Go with it. 3 and a black-red 4/4. Legendary creature, human artificer, rare. Permanents you control have ward, sacrifice a permanent. Each artifact card in your graveyard has unearth 1 black red. So what kind of awesome cards can we put in our graveyard, artifacts that we want to be unearthing for the cost of 3 mana? Every artifact in the set you now have to look at a little different as we can unearth it. Do remember, we do have to exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So you really want to have a sweet ETB, something like that. Ward sacrifice a permanent is nasty. I mean, yes, there is a world where they flood out on lands and they have to sack lands, but that's usually not bad for you. Reminds me a little bit of Nicole Bolas Dragon God, I believe. But yeah, just targeting any permanent you have, having to sacrifice a permanent could be a big deal all on its own, especially if our opponents are trying to play spot removal deck. So I could see one of these coming in from sideboards for Grixis mirrors, things of that nature. Overall, though, I'm not sure what I'm doing with the Unearth ability, and I'm not sold on it as a 5 mana card because that is a lot. So I'm going to recommend crafting 0, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this get some niche play. Queen Kayla, why do I struggle with this one? Kayla. Queen Kayla Bin Krug. 1 and a red-white, so Boros, 2/3. Human Noble, rare, legendary, 4. Discard all the cards in your hand and draw that many. You may choose an artifact or creature card with mana value 1. You discard it this way. Then do the same for an artifact or creature of 2 or 3. Return those cards to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So we want to play this on turn 3. We want to untap and activate the ability. When we do, we want our hand to contain a 1 mana card, a 2 mana card, and a 3 mana card. If we do that, we draw 3 cards and we put those cards on the battlefield for free, getting 6 mana worth of value. Interesting. It feels like a way for a very aggressive deck to just get an insane, like, kind of over the top value play if their 3-drop goes unanswered. But it is a 3 mana card that doesn't do anything the turn it enters the battlefield, and it competes with cards like Adeline that can create a token the same turn they enter the battlefield. It competes with disruptive cards like Anointed Peacekeeper. It has tough competition, but in Boros, not maybe as tough. It doesn't really seem like a card you play with Wedding Announcement. I mean, you really want creatures and artifacts, not enchantments. So there might be a deck that wants to play the Queen, and it is super threatening. Like, if the opponent doesn't kill this, the amount of value you can get off this can be pretty absurd, and all that you're asking is that your 3-drop lives to turn 4. Not insane. However, it is very punishing if the opponent plays a Shieldred. That is something that is a big issue for the deck. It also sucks that it has to be a sorcery. It would be really fun if you could hold up mana, threaten activations like Wandering Emperor, and make their turn very, very difficult, or have them not knowing what 1, 2, and 3 you might put onto the battlefield. Of course, there is a little magical Christmas land in my discussion of the card, but there's enough there, enough value that it's worth trying out, and I would probably start with 2 copies. 1 if you want to play some Historic Brawl, something like that, and if you're super cynical and don't want to do any, I can see that too. There's definitely a world where this card doesn't see play, but I think there's enough value there to try 2 copies. Saheeli Filigree Master is 2 and a red-blue. It's an Izzet Planeswalker with legendary Saheeliness. It's just so fabulous. 3 loyalty, mythic. The +1 is a scry one. You may tap an untapped artifact you control. If you do, draw a card. Okay. -2 is to create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, and they gain haste until end of turn. That's pretty cool. That can be really good for like swinging over and picking off a Liliana. Like flying 1/1 Thopters, especially in multiples, they pressure planeswalkers well. -4, you get an emblem with artifact creatures you control, get +1/+1, and artifact spells you control cost 1 less. That is a cheap emblem. You can do that 1 turn after you play her. Artifact creatures get +1/+1, and spells cost 1 less. I mean, obviously we're talking again about an artifact-centric deck that I haven't completely fleshed out, and I'm not sure I've seen all the artifacts that go into it. But you picture this in making like Grixis Bankbuster / Anvil value style deck, and you're like, oh, I see how this could work for sure. On an empty battlefield, you're just plussing and getting so much value, and you're threatening an emblem that's going to make the construct tokens from the Anvil or Thopter tokens from future Saheeli's amazing. And then you have the -2, and you're just like, yeah, that's a lot of bodies, and they can swing in and attack. They do damage. This card can be very good, but it requires an artifact centric deck, and I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. So if you crafted 0, I would not blame you. Gosh, if the artifact deck is good, it's 3, right? It's like 3 is kind of a ceiling-ish on a card like this that you could easily do. But since I'm not sure about the deck, I will recommend 0. This is one that watch for in the first few weeks to see if it takes off or if it just kind of fades away. Sarenth Great Worm is 4 and a red-green 7/6 mythic worm with trample. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone token. That's a pretty cool card. It's a landfall type trigger. It's a land. It includes the opponent. It's definitely more of a commander card. That sounds like a really sweet thing that you could do in commander. The art is absolutely sweet. I'm going to give this a don't craft for standard, but I think it's a very cool design for other formats. Skyfish Spider is 2 and a black-green for a 3/3 reach spider. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, destroy target non-land permanent. When it dies, you gain 1 life for each creature card in your graveyard. If you do, exile the spider from your graveyard. The last bit of text probably isn't the most important part by far, but this is close to a very multi-dimensional Ravenous Chupacabra if you produce sacrificial things. And having it on a creature is very relevant because you can get it back from the graveyard with various reanimation means. You can make copies of it with things that clone creatures. You can return it to your hand with things that bounce creatures. Having the body attached to it allows for kind of abuse of this effect. You do have to be able to create a lot of token creatures or cheap creatures that you don't mind dying, but if you do, this can manage the entire battlefield, and then if you get it back, you can manage it again. So I love Skyfisher Spider, and I hope that we have some sweet decks to play it in. Tawnos the Toy Maker is 3 and a green-blue for a 3/5 rare human artificer that is legendary, and whenever you cast a beast or bird creature spell, you may copy it, except the copy is an artifact in addition to its other types. All right, you fans of beast and bird tribal stuff, get to work, but I'm not touching this card. It's all on you. Third Path Iconoclast, that's it. Blue-red for a 2/1 human monk, uncommon. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. That seems like a pretty good effect, like a Young Pyromaster type effect. I'm pretty sure Young Pyromaster required it to be instant and sorcery too. This is just a non-creature, and it makes artifacts, which can be synergistic with a lot of things, and it makes soldiers, which is synergistic with a lot of things. So I expect this card to see play somewhere. Just curving Monastery Swiftspear into this, into cast some cheap spells, is going to produce a ton of value on the battlefield. I'm worried about the 2/1 body not being able to get in there and attack very often without trading with something bad. If battlefields are pretty clogged in this particular meta, not a lot of wide open opponents to go swing in on. Really wish this had some form of evasion, but even as just a token maker, it is a good rate for it, and I look forward to seeing this in some kind of deck. The Cassia Digsite Mentor is 1 Bant for a 4/3 human artificer rare legendary. Creatures you control have vigilance and tap to surveil 1. Wow. That's bizarre. Oh, big ability. 2 green, white, blue to exile this card from your graveyard. Return any number of artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. I don't know what to think of this. It gives the ability to itself. It also gives the ability to all your creatures. So if you have creatures sitting around on the battlefield, they can tap to surveil. And you can really dig through your deck if you have some token creatures on the field. Stuff from Wedding Announcement, Resolute Reinforcements, Join the Dance, you know? At the same time, you're not using those cards for anything else, which is concerning. You really want to be attacking, doing some fun stuff with it. But it's not like this card does nothing the turn you play it, because the turn you play it, if you have 2 or 3 creatures just hanging back as blockers, they can tap and give you that surveil to help you increase your graveyard and find the card you really need. Then, of course, the late game, bring it all back. I guess you want a lot of artifacts in your deck, and 10 or less total mana value, you want them to be very impactful. Can a deck like this come together and be good in the colors of Bant? If it were in the colors of Grixis, I'd say, oh my gosh, I'm definitely playing one of this in the Anvil decks. In Bant, I'm really unsure. But it is a cool card. I'm going to say don't craft it, but it's something to keep an eye on that might be a lot better than it looks, and I might be playing with it in the future. Oh, our final melding. It's Urza, Lord Protector. Let's start with this card. It's 1 and a white and a blue and a 2/4 legendary creature, Artificer Human, and it's a mythic. Artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. That's a lot of cost reductions. Then 7, if you meld along with the Might Stone and Weak Stone, you meld. Activate as a sorcery. So that's a lot of mana. 7 mana to put into this is a chunk. Holy cow. But the 3 mana for a 2/4 body with a lot of cost reduction isn't a completely unplayable card. It's just not nearly as good as a lot of things we can do for 3 mana. Let's have a look at the Might Stone and Weak Stone, the other Melody card. It's a 5 mana artifact, which means it's 1 cheaper if you control Urza, 4 mana. And the Might Stone and Weak Stone is a legendary artifact Power Stone. It's rare. When it enters the battlefield, you choose 1, draw 2 cards. I like that. Big surprise. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. That's cool. That gets around indestructible. That kills most things you need to kill. It also is a mana artifact. You can tap it for 2 colorless mana. The mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact creatures. It's like a Power Stone. So the cool thing about this is it does curve perfectly with Urza if you're hitting your land drops into the ability, because you can use the 2 mana. It can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells, but it can be used to activate abilities. Same thing with all the Power Stones. So you can play this for 4, untap, hit your land drop, tap this for 2, tap your lands. You have 7, you meld at sorcery speed. What do you get when you meld? You get Urza, the Planeswalker. And it says you may activate the loyalty abilities of Urza Planeswalker twice each turn, rather than only once. 7 freaking loyalty, +2. Artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast this turn cost 2 less to cast, and you gain 2 life. Seems busted. +1, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. 0, create 2 1/1 soldier artifact creature tokens. -3, exile target non-land permanent. -10, artifacts and planeswalkers you control gain indestructible until end of turn and destroy all non-land permanents. My god. You know, you can't say this Planeswalker doesn't defend itself, but it should. You went through a lot to get it. So it shouldn't surprise you if you've watched this far. I'm going to go to a place of, if you really want to craft these and try to build a deck around them, I would craft 3 copies of Urza, the Lord Protector. It is a decent card, and you're going to want to make sure that your deck has a lot of other synergies with artifacts, instants, and sorceries. You do not want to play this in an enchantment deck. You do not want to play this in something like a Rafine deck. You really want to lean into these synergies, something closer to a control deck, probably. So you play about 3 copies of these. You play 2 copies of these. And I think that both of them are decent cards on their own that must be respected by the opponent, especially if you can find good cards to play with the Protector. I don't know, Mysterious Limousine's an artifact. Is that good? Wait, did I say good cards? But yeah, instants and sorceries, I mean, getting a cost reduction on your Silver Scrutiny, so you're drawing 3 the next turn, sounds pretty good, and you can do that at instant speed. So yeah, we can do stuff with this. We can make things happen. And then 2 copies of Might Stone and Weak Stone. Every now and then you'll meld them and you'll win the game. The rest of the time, you'll just have solid cards that do solid things. 3, 2, get your Planeswalker, profit. Don't craft any if you don't like the idea of building these decks or trying to meld anyway, but if you love the idea of the quest, 3, 2, 1, contact. No, anyway, that's Urza. And this is Urza. Urza, the Prince of Krug, the other Urza. 2 and a white blue for a rare 2/3 human artificer. Artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. That's a bonus. That's a lot. That's a Mega Lord effect. 6 mana, create a token that's a copy of target artifact you control, except it's a 1/1 soldier in addition to its other types. That is amazing too. That is also amazing. The fact that it's a 1/1 soldier in addition to other types is kind of a sneaky limiter on it. It's open-ended, so at first you're like, oh my gosh, I can, like, if I can get a mana rock to somehow produce 6 mana and then I copy it, I can go infinite. No, because it's a 1/1 soldier with summoning sickness. So it's a cool little bottleneck for the card. Is this card good? Well, let's see how many artifact creatures we can realistically play and how good that Anthem effect is. This Anthem effect is the juice of the card. And if it is a solid effect that works with a lot of the cards in your deck, that is already a pretty decent deck. This card is very good. This is the gravy. The 6 mana is probably just the gravy. It's extra. So, should you craft it? I'm going to say no, but I will try to build a deck around Artifact Creature Beatdown using Urza as its Anthem effect, and if that works out, awesome. So, keep an eye out for that deck, but don't craft it until we've tried that deck. Yoshin Dissident is a green and a white for an uncommon 1/1 human artificer that says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So, if we have enough ways to make artifacts in a very artifact-centric deck that also happens to be green-white, this can be a Luminarch Aspirant or then some, since there's no like limit to it, and you can move it to multiple creatures. Does that deck exist? I don't see it, but we'll try to build it and keep an eye out for it. It's just an uncommon anyway, so it's a fun little build around. Blade Coil Serpent is X and 6. Oh god, what is this? Mythic 5/4 artifact serpent. When Blade Coil Serpent enters the battlefield, for each blue spent to cast it, draw a card. Okay. When it enters the battlefield, for each black spent to cast it, each opponent discards a card. Okay. When it enters the battlefield, for each red, it gets +1/+0 and gains trample and haste until end of turn. Yeah, trample haste. Lame. No, just kidding. Obviously, if you actually pull off the Grixisness of blue, black, red, and you get a 6/4 trample haste, you discard a card, I draw a card, that is not a bad rate. It is expensive, and it's not flexible because you can't play it earlier than 6. You have to put at least 6 mana into this. The fact that it's open-ended on top of that means it's a wonderful mana sink if you can generate a ton of mana. But it doesn't work great with Power Stones because that can only pay colorless cost, which reduces the amount of impact you're going to have. It can just add some power to the top of this card. Once again, a lot of these like mythic constructs, I'm just not feeling it, and I'm going to give it a 0 because I think it's too expensive for standard. But this one is closer. I could see a world where all this ETB is fine. I just think that we can do better. I think that we don't need this necessarily. So, yep, 0 on the Blade Coil. Sorry, buddy. Clay Champion is X and 4 mythic. I guess we're going to get more of this type of effect. Artifact creature construct 2/2. It enters the battlefield with this at least 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each green spent to cast it. What? 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each green spent to cast it. I didn't even read the rest. Casual 8/8 for 4 in mono green? That's something already. So when Clay Champion enters the battlefield, choose up to 2 other target creatures you control for each white spent to cast it. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. So if you use the white mana, you can spread it around across a bunch of creatures that perhaps don't have summoning sickness and get in there. So in mono white, it's a counter on each of them. 2 other creatures, a counter on each of them. So in mono white, if you have, say, 2 other 2/2s, they become 4/4s if you pay this for 4 mana. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got 6 power across 3 bodies for 4 mana. Is that good? Doesn't feel as good as the 8/8, but it probably is, since those other creatures don't have summoning sickness. Ah, man, this card's interesting. And it will have to be tested. It will have to be tested. I think in mono white, I'd prefer Intrepid Adversary as far as output, but Intrepid Adversary doesn't put out as much damage as quickly, whereas this one puts more counters on the creatures that can attack right away, but you do have to have multiple bodies. Should be very doable in mono white in a meat hookless metagame. And in mono green, you just get thick monster, just huge. And there's usually something you can do to make that good. So this card is going to need to be tested. My biggest concern is that it might get outclassed by other options in the spot, and many of them you might already own. Also, those monocolor decks, you know, will they hold up once all the colors are getting fleshed out? They're already struggling against, you know, good stuff soup. I don't know how to tell you how to craft this card. I really don't. I mean, this could be a 3 or a 4 of, if that is the best rate for what you are doing. And it's quite possible that that will be. I'm going to say, let's go with 2. If you play green and white aggressive strategies, let's try out 2 and see how it plays and see where it takes us. Because I could see this being a very good and useful card across multiple styles of aggro decks, making a pretty good craft. It is a mythic though, so be mindful. Cityscape Leveler is 8 for an 8/8 trample mythic artifact creature construct. It has Unearth 8, but it says when you cast this spell and whenever Leveler attacks, destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a tapped Power Stone token. 8 is too much. I am amazed by the mythicness. So we need some kind of synergy to reduce its casting cost or cheat into play, but it does say whenever you cast it. Not whenever but also whenever it attacks. So if you give it haste, you're fine, but it does say whenever you cast it. So this is a very tricky card to manage. I can't see it making a huge dent, so I'm going to give Cityscape Leveler a 0. A lot of mythics at 0 in this set. I guess save your wild cards. Not a bad thing. Liberator Urza's Battlethopter. Oh Urza, you made your own Battlethopter. That's pretty cool. 3 colorless for a 1/2 legendary artifact creature Thopter, rare. Flash. Flying. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. Okay, this is already going to be popular because of, like, we've seen Shimmer Mirror and, like, Commander is a popular card. Whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than this card's power, which a lot of them will be, put a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. Whenever you cast a spell, huh? Yeah, I imagine this thing is going to grow significantly over time. My big concern for this card is that you flash it in and all you got that turn was a 1/2. So a 1/2 flyer is not a good rate, even with flash and even with the other abilities. You have to be able to grow it pretty quick. If you're curving out, it's like a 3/4 within the next 2 turns. If you're under a ton of pressure though, this won't be enough to offset it. It doesn't draw a card. It really is reliant on staying on the battlefield to have value. I think it's a neat card. I'm currently going to give it a 0 just because it dies too easy, it doesn't engage well in combat, and it takes a while for it to get going, and we just don't have that kind of time in standard. 0. Portal to Phyrexia. 9 colorless mana for an artifact mythic. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. That's cool. And it says when it enters the battlefield, not when you cast it. So you can reanimate this or sneak it into play to get this effect. Finally, we have something worth sneaking into play in these artifacts, I think. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian. Any graveyard. Wow, so it has an ETB and then an ongoing upkeep trigger. This is a good card. This is a card that is not worth casting for 9 mana. That is way too expensive. But if you can sneak it into play, find ways to get this effect, it is a very good card, a very strong card. If this were a vehicle, it would be broken with Greasefang. Like find ways to reanimate and cheat out artifacts. This is the card you want for it, and that is the only reason I would craft this card. And since that's a very niche case, I'm going to tell you not to craft it, but it's nice to know that's in the set to give payoff to those decks that might try to cheat it into play. The Stasis Coffin is 3 mana for a legendary artifact. 2 tap, exile the coffin. You gain protection from everything until your next turn. That is cool. It can protect you from everything. That sounds nice. You get in your little coffin and you go in there and you'll come out next turn when you're ready to do more things. The problem I have with this card, too, one, it exiles itself. Therefore, you can't recur it and do a ton of things with it. Maybe you can set up a way to like make a copy of it every turn and then use it. That sounds like too much work and too much mana to be realistic. The other thing I hate about this card is it's only you that gains the protection. It's not your creatures, it's not your permanents, it's not your cards. So the opponent can still totally spend their turn targeting and destroying the things you were going to use to win the game, because let's be honest, this card doesn't win the game itself, it just prolongs it. You still have to win. So for me, the Stasis Coffin is a 0, a don't craft, but it's a cool card that exists. The Stone Brain is 2 mana for a legendary artifact at rare with a whole bunch of this text. Let's go. 2 and a tap, exile the Stone Brain, choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them. That player shuffles, then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. Activate only as a sorcery. I hate activate only as a sorcery, but I guess I get why it exists that way. It would be a lot more fun if we could time it, hold mana up. It also is a card that can go in any deck because it's a colorless artifact that can completely shore up a weakness to one specific card. If there's one card that is beating you, this card can solve it, but it is 4 total mana, 2 to play it, 2 to use it. And if you don't have reduction for your artifacts, it also doesn't replace itself necessarily, and if it hits stuff in their hand, that does replace itself. So it is also card disadvantage, which is not wonderful, but it is kind of a safety valve on the format. If something is too powerful, you can take all of them. If something specifically is someone's only win con, you can take all of them. What if you had no Hadijins in your mono blue deck? I don't know. So keep this card in mind, but I wouldn't craft it. I would wait and see if you are particularly fond of a deck that needs some kind of a weird solution to a problem that is consistent in the metagame. And if you are, then this card could be a craft for you. Most people probably won't need to craft this card, however, for its entirety in the format. Thran Spider is 3 colorless for a rare 2/4 artifact spider with reach. When it enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each create a power stone. Meh. 7. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact, put the rest in your hand. I don't know why this is rare. Maybe power stones were just that busted and limited. I think I heard something to that effect at Magic 30 at a panel, but I can't imagine playing this card in one of my decks. Craft 0. Battlefield Forge. This is a land. I mean, it's a reprint of the Painland cycle. You guys don't need me to read these. But Boros is back on the menu, and Naya and Jeskai get significantly better. So, welcome to the format, Battlefield Forge. I'm particularly interested if Boros aggro can rise to any of the glory it had before rotation. It still has a lot of the powerful cards, and there are some interesting replacements for Luminarch Gas Pirate printed in this specific set. Blast Zone is a returning card, and it enters the battlefield with a charge counter. It taps for a colorless. XX, you put charge counters on Black Zone. 3 and a tap, sacrifice it, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. It's another awkward and expensive, yet relatively free, close to free way to stick a card in your deck, a utility land that can solve problems your deck doesn't normally solve. If mono black can't destroy an artifact to save its life, it can run Blast Zone in the mana base. It's nice just to see some utility lands, because it was getting kind of lame to run decks that were like 24 swamps. Now we have some payoff for that with some of the cards I showed earlier, like Corrupt, and the white card that exiles a creature with mana value equal to or less than the number of planes you control. It would have been nice to have that in the format already, because now we have cool utility lands like Blast Zone that we want to run in our mono black and mono white decks. So should you run Blast Zone in your deck? Should you craft it? You don't want to run too many. The more you draw, the worse they are. It is a very niche card. There might be a deck that wants to solve specific problems and leans on Blast Zone, but for the most part, I recommend crafting 1, and make sure that you check your collection. You may already have one from War of the Spark, so you may not even need to craft this. Brushland, green and white. The aggro enchantment deck will rejoice, and it looks like it got some new toys in addition to the land, so I don't expect that deck to go away. And it's nice to have better mana for the decks that really need it. Demolition Field. This, if you read the whole thing, reads like a Field of Ruin reprint, and we all already have Field of Ruin. So why would they print this card? There is a simple line of text in it that says, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. That land's controller may search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, and you may search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. Both are may, so you can't use the Field of Ruin, force you to shuffle tricks that have come up many times. So I think Field of Ruin is still what you want to run in standard. The reason that this card exists is Commander. Like so many things, if you don't get it as a Magic boomer, the answer is Commander. And in Commander, Field of Ruin lets each player search their library for that land, so nobody runs it because you ramp 2 other players while dealing with somebody's land. Whereas a Demolition Field can deal with those Gaia's Cradles and those Cabal Coffers and Urborgs and all those lands that are pesky. So these basically go in every Commander deck now. You don't have to worry about it much in standard, but I felt a need to explain it since I got asked a few times like why this card even exists, especially in the same format as Field of Ruin. The next card is Fortified Beachhead. It's a land, and it's a land that taps for blue or white. You have my attention. It is rare. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a soldier card from your hand. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you revealed a soldier or if you control a soldier. So it is a blue-white untapped dual land if you have a soldier. And that tells you very clearly that we are supposed to be playing blue-white soldiers. The 5 in a tap gives soldiers you control +1/+1 until end of turn, an anthem effect built into a land. Very cool. A very cool tribal card. And you can bet all the elf fans and, you know, all of the goblin fans are like, oh my gosh, where is my Fortified Beachhead? Surely it's part of a cycle. It's not. Get over it. Blue and white gets a tribal soldier pumping land. You all get nothing. So if the soldier deck is a thing, and it really feels like they tried to make the soldier deck a thing, of course it's going to want to run 4 of these. Therefore, this is a 4 craft if you believe in soldiers, and I'm going to see if soldiers are good and try to share that information within the first week of the format, I think for sure. It's one of the decks that is most calling out as we must build this. So craft 4 if you're into soldiers. You can also just wait and see if the soldier deck is good. Hall of Tagzin is a land that is rare. It taps for colorless. It has a 1 and tap for 1 mana of any color. And then for 4 and a tap, you create a tapped Power Stone token. So it's like 5 mana to ramp up greater and greater, and it is a source of regular artifacts. Considering that the Voldaren estate creating blood tokens didn't really see play in the format, even though there are plenty of vampires in the format and a lot of use for blood tokens, I find it hard to believe that this one will do amazingly well. I could see it in some kind of a Drago control deck though, as something to do with your mana on end step that eventually makes a huge mana advantage and lets casting things. I guess it can't cast Silver Scrutiny. You need another sink for the mana, but as long as you have some sinks for the mana, like this can be good. However, it's definitely not going to fit in every deck. It's definitely a very specialized card. So my recommendation is not to craft this card and let somebody show you that it actually belongs in a deck and is useful in that deck before you worry too much about spending a rare wild card on it. Llanowar Wastes. Black-green Painland. Let's go. It's going to be good to have Golgari back on the menu. A few times I was trying to build decks, especially in Sultai. Sultai was missing its Painlands the most. So it's good to see this, and of course it will see play. Mishra's Foundry is a rare land that taps for a colorless for 2 mana. You can turn this into a 2/2 Assembly Worker artifact creature. Until end of turn, that's still land. And for 1 in a tap, target attacking Assembly Worker gets +2/+2 until end of turn. It has to be an attacking assembly worker. It doesn't have vigilance, so it really needs another assembly worker of some type to use that ability well, and you might just have multiple Mishra's Foundries. This is not the greatest artifact creature land of all time, but it's definitely better than nothing, and it's definitely going to fit into monocolored aggro decks and make some of those basic land payoffs less relevant. Of course, you would want to run, let's say, 2 or 3 of these in like mono white and mono black aggro. With mono black, you have to worry about whether or not you're still casting Invoke Despair on time, or if you necessarily need to. In mono white, there isn't a lot of downside. There's no like triple white cards or anything like that you're playing in an aggressive deck of that nature. Green will like this too. Mono green could really use something like this to keep the pressure on after a board wipe. This card is not nearly as good as Mutavault or Mishra's Factory. It is much more expensive, but it's nice to have a creature land that can hit for some damage back in standard. You really felt the lack of it after the lands rotated with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So we had a little time off. It's time to bring it back. How many should you craft? I'm sure a lot of people will try playing 4 of this card, but I think you'll discover it's not that good, and it's definitely not worth messing your mana up. It's not nearly as powerful as Faceless Haven. It's literally half as powerful. So I'm going to recommend, even though it's okay in multiples because of this ability, I'm going to recommend 3. 3 seems like a good number for Mishra's Foundry, and I wouldn't be surprised if that fell to 2, but if you play monocolor decks, I think 3 will go into plenty of places. Tokasia's Dig Site is a common land that taps for colorless, but then has the ability to 3-tap and surveil 1. That is, look at the top card of your library, you may put it into your graveyard. I think there are decks that wouldn't mind one of this, and it's a common, so you don't have to worry about the crafting. But when I think about what's available, we have the land, we have the creature land. You probably want several of that, but I think that there are control decks that don't want the creature land as much as 1 copy of this for their late game digging through their deck just sounds more appealing. It's a very unique, it's a very different kind of strategy, though. It's definitely a strategy trying to play well into the late game, playing 20-minute games of best of 1, whereas most of best of 1 doesn't even approach that, and the speed of the format and the snowballing nature of the format seems like this card is a mistake in most decks. But fortunately, it's only a common mistake, so go ahead and craft 1 and try it out. I think that 1 copy in a few of the more grindier decks of the format might be interesting. Then finally, we have Underground River. This is a rare, and it is the land that makes the blue and the black mana, and maybe some Dimir control can come back on the menu. I definitely felt the lack of this, especially playing Sultai and Dimir. So it's nice to have the full cycle of lands opening up all the color possibilities. Welcome Underground River to the format. And that brings us to the end of the set review. Oh my goodness, my voice. I hope you enjoyed me going over all the cards that I find interesting from the Brothers War. I hope the recommendations are somewhat useful, but most importantly, I hope that from watching this, you know exactly which cards you can come back to in 2 or 3 months when they're format staples, and you can point at me and laugh and say, look what CGV said about it, time clip, stamp, timestamp, clip, haha. You can post on social. You can show it to all your friends how stupid I am. Yeah, I know that's why you watch these things. I get it. I know how YouTube works. I do it anyway. What does that tell you? What does that tell you? It means I love you. That's what that means. So you made it all the way to the end of the set review. That is a monumental feat. You've listened to my voice more than any human being should probably have to do. So please like the video because you probably liked it. And if you didn't, don't worry. There will be a new video very soon. But yeah, hit like. And consider subscribing to the channels, consider joining the Cool Kids Club, and hopefully on Wednesday we'll be doing a little bit of a live video that day during the early access event for the Brothers War. Then I'm going to hustle trying to record a bunch of videos so that during the next 5 days before the release on Arena, you have a lot of sweet content to peruse to get yourself ready for what to craft and what deck you're going to play right out of the gate come the following Tuesday when Brothers War launches on Arena. One more time, this video is brought to you by the Dragon Rider playmat and foil token bundle available at coolstuffinc.com, coolstuffinc.com/CGB. We only have it for a limited time till November 21st in a limited quantity, 500, and they'll have gold first edition printed right on them. The coolest dragon you've ever seen. The greatest dragon rider you've ever found on YouTube. Yes, indeed, it's me, it's CGB. So go check that out. Thank you for watching this video. As always, I will see you in the next video. You're cool.